They called her empty, wolfless, a curse stitched into royal blood. The king who fathered her stood before 1,000 warriors and ordered her death before she could draw her second breath. But here's what no empire ever survives. The thing it buries doesn't always stay buried. Some children grow up in the dirt. Some learn to move like shadows, fight like instinct, and carry a power so old the Moonstone itself never had a name for it. Tonight, you stay until the end. Like this, drop your city in the comments, and let me tell you about the girl born to end an empire. The blood eclipse came without warning. That was the first lie the scribes would write. That no one saw it coming. That the sky simply broke open above the silver moon capital and bled crimson across the stars the way a wound bleeds across skin, slow and deliberate, and too late to stop. But the truth was that 3 court astronomers had filed written reports 7 days prior, and those reports had been collected, sealed, and placed in a locked chest in the king's east chamber, because Kalin of the Silver Moon Empire did not read warnings. He made them. The throne hall was obsidian from floor to ceiling, black stone quarried from the Ma Mountains 300 years ago by the first Silver Moon king, who had wanted his power to look permanent. The stone absorbed light the way water absorbs heat, slowly, completely, without mercy. Tonight, with 10,000 candle flames burning in their iron brackets, and the blood eclipse painting everything beyond the arched windows in deep arterial red, the hall looked exactly like the inside of something that had already died. Kalin stood at the far end of the hall on the elevated dais where the throne waited, though he wasn't seated. He never sat during formal assemblies. Sitting suggested rest. Kalin had not rested in 17 years of rule, and he intended the fact to be visible on him, the way intention was visible on a blade. He was 6 feet 4 inches of controlled force, his silver war cloak pinned at both shoulders with iron clasps shaped like wolf fangs. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples. Not from age, he was 39, but from something the court physicians called aura saturation, the body absorbing too much wolf essence for too long, the way iron rusts from too much exposure to blood. His jaw was the kind of jaw that judges used when they wanted to communicate before speaking. His eyes were pale gray, wolf pale, the color of a blade held flat against winter sky. He was not a man who required introduction in any room he entered. The Moonstone hung suspended above the hall's center by nothing visible. No chain, no bracket, no thread of silk. It floated there the way a warning floats in the air between 2 people who have not yet said the thing that cannot be unsaid. It was roughly the size of a man's skull, roughly spherical and roughly translucent, though none of those approximations captured it with honesty. The Moonstone was old enough that the Empire's oldest records didn't record its origin, only its function. It read wolf essence at the moment of birth, confirmed lineage, measured power, and ratified succession. It was the only authority in the Silver Moon Empire that outranked the king. At least that was what the ceremony required everyone to believe. The hall was packed. High alphas in their regional war colors, pack elders in formal robes, military commanders in full armor, court officials, scribes with their quills already moving, 300 guards posted at intervals along the walls, and in the gallery above, the families of nobility arranged in ordered rows. The air smelled like iron and expensive fur, and the particular tension that gathers in rooms full of powerful people who are all pretending to feel exactly the same thing. Queen Lyra stood to the left of the dais, below the throne's level, because that was where ceremony placed consorts. She was 28 years old, and she had the look of someone who had learned to make her body very still as a form of protection. Her hair was dark auburn, pinned back from her face. Her gown was silver silk with blue thread worked into the hem, the colors of the healing lineage she came from. The Ivari healers, the most respected non-combat bloodline in the Empire. She was holding their daughter. The infant had been born 4 hours ago. Lyra had not slept. Her hands were not shaking, which required more effort than anyone in that hall would ever know. The child was wrapped in white linen, eyes closed, breathing with the slow, even rhythm of someone who did not yet understand what rooms were for. She had dark hair, fine as spider silk, already curling at her temples. She weighed exactly as much as a life should weigh, which was more than anyone could lift with their arms alone. Lyra had not named her yet. That was waiting. Everything was waiting. The ceremony of first judgment had specific requirements. The Moonstone would descend when the heir was presented. The stone would read the child's wolf essence, confirm the silver moon bloodline, and broadcast that confirmation to every wolf in the hall in the form of a resonance that all of them would feel simultaneously in the chest, a harmonic, a frequency, the feeling of recognition between predators who share origin. Then the high priest would announce the child's name, the king would speak the formal acceptance, and the empire would have its next generation confirmed. It had gone exactly this way for every silver moon heir across 11 generations. Kaelin nodded to the high priest. The old man raised his staff. The moonstone began to descend. Lyra looked down at her daughter and did not breathe. The stone settled 3 feet above the child's body, close enough that its faint interior light caught in the infant's dark hair like moonlight on water. The hall went still. Even the scribes stopped writing. Every wolf in the room opened their senses, waiting for the resonance, that chest-deep harmonic that would tell them the bloodline was whole, the empire was continuous, the hierarchy was intact. The moonstone pulsed once. The pulse went nowhere. It hit the child's body and stopped, the way sound stops when it meets a wall with no echo. Silence. Not the ordinary silence of a room waiting, the specific silence of a room that has stopped understanding itself. The silence that comes after the wrong thing happens, and for a moment no one's mind has caught up with what their senses recorded. The moonstone pulsed again. Harder. The kind of pulse that made the iron brackets along the walls vibrate in their stone mounts, and the candle flames bend sideways all at once. Nothing came back. The infant slept. Lyra's arms tightened, just slightly. The kind of movement that looks like adjustment, but is actually the body preparing for impact. "What is this?" Kaelin said. It was not a question. It was the verbal equivalent of a door being pulled off its frame. The high priest lowered his staff. His face had gone gray in a way that made him look like he was dissolving. "Majesty." "What is this?" Kaelin said again, and his voice was the same volume, which was somehow worse than if he had raised it. The high priest opened his mouth and no useful words came out. He was an old man who had performed this ceremony 14 times across 2 generations. He had never prepared an answer for this because the answer was considered categorically impossible. Wolf blood ran true. The moonstone never failed. The air of the Silver Moon Empire would always resonate. The old man looked at the stone. The stone hovered. The infant breathed. "There is no aura," the high priest finally said. The words fell into the hall like stones into still water, and the ripple they created was not sound but motion, the shifting of bodies, the tightening of hands on ceremonial weapons, the specific held breath of several hundred wolves simultaneously recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the next 10 minutes. "No aura," Kaelin repeated. "No wolf presence. No resonance. The child—" The high priest paused. His throat worked. "The child carries nothing." The hall broke. Not into sound, though sound came, the low, urgent murmur of several hundred people processing a catastrophe simultaneously. It broke first in the way rooms break before anyone speaks, in the realignment of bodies, the shift of eyes, the particular stillness of the elite guard near the throne who had begun, without visible instruction, to collectively decide what they would do if ordered to do something terrible. Lyra did not move. She stood where ceremony had placed her, below the dais, to the left, her daughter in her arms, and she felt the hall rearranging itself around the fact of her child's existence with the specific precision of a trap closing. "That's my answer," she said very quietly. She wasn't speaking to anyone, or she was speaking to herself, to the version of herself that had spent 8 months willing this moment not to come, bargaining with probability, telling herself that the moonstone measured what it measured, and her daughter was silver-blooded. Kaelin was silver-blooded. The lineage was unbroken. The resonance would come. She was speaking to that version of herself and telling her that her time was over. The moonstone rose back toward the ceiling without being commanded. Kaelin descended the dais steps. He walked the way he always walked, with the deliberate mechanical evenness of someone who has learned to weaponize his own movement, each step placed like a declaration. The crowd parted. Not from deference alone, but from the aura he was projecting, the alpha dominance field that every high wolf generated under stress, Except Kalen's had never known a ceiling. When he was this controlled and this cold, being near him felt like standing at the edge of a drop you couldn't see the bottom of. He stopped in front of Lyra. He looked at the child. The child slept. "Look at me," he said to Lyra. She looked at him. She had made a specific decision about her eyes before this night began, that she would not let fear into them. Not because she wasn't afraid, she was, in the way you are afraid of the moment after a structure fails, and before you understand how far the fall will be, but because fear in her eyes would confirm something for him, and she refused to confirm things for Kalen. "Tell me what you did," he said. "I carried her," Lyra said, "and I delivered her. That's what I did." "Do not speak to me in that register right now. I'm speaking to you accurately." His jaw moved. "A silver moon heir carries no aura, no wolf presence. You are telling me there is no answer for this. I'm telling you she's 4 hours old and she's asleep, and she just spent that entire ceremony being pointed at by a floating stone while 300 wolves stared at her, and she is asleep, Kalen, because she doesn't know yet what kind of people she was born to." Something moved through his eyes. It wasn't grief. It wasn't love. It was a specific kind of calculation that Lyra recognized because she had spent 9 years learning to read him, and what she saw was a man who had already decided and was now working backward through the justifications. "She is wolfless," he said. Not to Lyra, to the hall. His voice carried in the obsidian space with the clarity of something designed to carry. "She is wolfless in the bloodline of the silver moon. This is not a defect. This is a contamination. A child without wolf essence in this lineage is not an heir. It is an error. And an error in the royal blood does not grow up to become a question the Empire cannot answer." The hall was silent again. The specific silence this time of people who understood exactly what was being said and were deciding how to stand in relation to it. "Kalen," Lyra's voice was flat and even and very clear, "you will not do this. She carries nothing. She cannot lead. She cannot rule. She cannot be. She is sleeping." Lyra stepped back, not in retreat, in the specific physical language of a person who is drawing a perimeter. "She is your daughter, and she is 4 hours old, and she is sleeping, and whatever you are about to say out loud in this hall, I am telling you right now that you will not." Captain Aron. The head of the royal guard detached from the wall near the throne. He was a broad man, 40, with a wolf scar across his left cheek that he had worn for 20 years with the same expression he was wearing now, which was the face of a soldier receiving an order he already knows he doesn't want. "Take the child," Kalen said. Lyra moved. She didn't think about it, which was the only reason it worked. Thinking would have introduced delay, and delay in this room was the same as surrender. She moved sideways between Aron and the path to her daughter, and the motion was clean and instinctive and fast enough that 2 of the nearby guards took an involuntary step toward her before catching themselves. "If your hands touch my daughter," she said to Aron, "I will destroy every healing record in this Empire's medical archive. Every wound I have healed, every formula I have developed, every compound for the field hospitals that keep your wolves alive in war. All of it. I will burn it before I let you touch her." Aron stopped. He looked at Kalen. Kalen's expression did not change, but something shifted in the room's atmosphere, the way air shifts before a storm when the pressure drops. The Ivari Healing Archive was not a symbolic threat. It was the only repository of field medicine the Empire possessed. 2 ongoing wars depended on it. The supply lines for 3 active campaign fronts ran through compounds that Lyra and her team had developed. Destroying it would not end Kalen's campaigns. It would extend them. It would bleed them. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had known what she was doing since she walked into this hall. "Majesty," said Elder Cormac from the High Alpha section. He was 70, white-haired, and had the particular authority of a man who had outlasted 3 different kings' absolute certainties. "Perhaps this judgment is better delivered in private council rather than—" "There is nothing private about a failure of bloodline, Elder." Kalen did not look away from Lyra. "Every wolf in this hall has the right to witness the judgment of the crown. What they are witnessing," Cormac said carefully, "is a king preparing to execute an infant on the night of a blood eclipse, and I would counsel you to consider what the Pax will make of that particular image." The hall murmured. Low, carefully measured, but murmured. Kalen let the silence run for 3 seconds. Then he said, "She will be removed from the capital by dawn. She will be taken to the Maw Mountain outposts, and the matter will be handled there, quietly, by people who understand discretion." "No," Lyra said. "You don't have a—" I said no. Her voice had not raised, but something in it had changed, the way the quality of a surface changes when you press it past the point of flexibility into the point of fracture. "And I am telling you, in this hall, in front of every alpha and elder and commander you invited here tonight, that if you send men to take this child anywhere, I will walk out of this empire, and I will take every piece of knowledge I have spent 20 years building with me, and I will give it to whoever will give her safety." The room had become very still. Kalen looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. "You are threatening the empire," he said. "I am describing consequences," Lyra said. "You taught me that. The difference between a threat and a consequence is that a threat might not happen." Something moved through him. It might have been respect, in the specific way that powerful people respect the thing that matches their temperature. It was brief. It didn't change anything. "Clear the hall," Kalen said. People moved. Guards cleared the aisles. The high alphas filed out with the quiet efficiency of men who were already calculating what this scene meant for their own pack politics. The scribes gathered their materials. Elder Cormac paused at the door and looked back at Lyra once, a look that held approximately 12 things he could not say in any room with soldiers in it, and then he was gone. The doors closed. The three of them were alone, Kalen, Lyra, and the child who did not know yet that the world was in the process of deciding whether to let her exist. "What do you want?" Kalen said. "Not angry, not cold in the way winter is cold. Cold in the way dead things are cold, which is the absolute cold, the cold that has stopped pretending. Safe passage," Lyra said, "out of the capital, out of Silver Moon territory, by dawn. And you believe I will simply— I believe you want me gone before any other pack sees me standing here holding a wolfless Silver Moon heir and draws their own conclusions." She tilted her head. "I believe the story is easier to control if I simply disappear, and I believe you are smart enough to know that dead healers don't deliver information quietly, and living ones sometimes do." Silence. "You have until dawn," Kalen said. "After that, you are not under my protection." "I have never been under your protection," Lyra said. "I thought I was for a while. That was a misunderstanding I've corrected." She turned and walked toward the side passage, the one the court physicians used, the one that had a door to the outer courtyard that she had memorized 9 months ago when she first understood what the eclipse calendar meant and began, quietly, to plan. She did not look back. Kalen stood in the obsidian hall alone with the Moonstone floating above him in the dark. And he said nothing, and his face held the specific expression of a man who has won a moment and knows it will cost him in a currency he hasn't yet learned to name. The courtyard beyond the physician's passage was empty, which meant Mira had done her job. Mira was Lyra's head attendant, 43 years old, built like a draft horse, possessed of the specific calmness that comes from a lifetime of being in rooms where things were breaking. She was standing next to a gray horse loaded with 2 saddlebags and a pack, and she was holding a second horse by the reins, and her face when she saw Lyra cross the courtyard said everything about what she had heard through the walls and how she felt about it. "Both horses," Lyra said. "Both horses," Mira confirmed. "The saddlebags have the compounds, the archive copies, the winter gear. Enough food for 12 days if we're careful." "We won't have 12 days before he changes his mind." "I know." Mira looked at the infant. Something crossed her face that she immediately controlled. "How is she?" "She's sleeping." Lyra transferred the child to the crook of one arm and put her foot in the stirrup. It required a specific kind of physical trust to mount a horse one-handed while holding a sleeping infant, the kind of trust that is less about confidence and more about having no other available option. "She doesn't know any of this is happening. That's the best thing about her right now," Mira said, mounting the second horse. "How far are we going?" Lyra looked toward the outer wall. Beyond it, the empire ended in a gradient. First the border territories, then the contested lands where 4 packs met and none fully held. Then the shadow reaches, the territory that didn't appear on most maps because most cartographers had enough sense not to go there. Far enough, she said. That's not a direction. Shadow Pact territory. Mira's expression did not change dramatically. This was its own form of eloquence. Shadow Pact territory was not, strictly speaking, survivable for an unescorted pair of women from the Silver Moon Court. It was not governed by any treaty. Its alpha, a man known as Magnus, was more story than person in the capital's accounting. A wolf who had refused 3 separate imperial summons and who had, on the occasion of the 4th summons, returned it in pieces. All right, Mira said. You could go back. I could, Mira agreed. I won't, but I could. Lyra looked at her for a moment, the kind of moment that has a lot of years inside it. Then let's move, she said. They rode. The capital fell behind them in stages. First the inner ring with its torchlit towers, and the distant sound of the throne hall ceremony being quietly disbanded. Then the merchant quarter with its shuttered storefronts and smell of sawdust and old cooking. Then the outer ring where the common wolves lived in low stone buildings and the streets were unpaved, and a few people were awake at this hour, moving between doors, and some of them saw 2 riders and looked away with the specific deliberateness of people who had learned that seeing things sometimes cost more than not seeing them. Then the gate. The gatekeepers were 4 guards, night shift, armed. One of them raised his hand as Lyra and Mira approached. City's closed after eclipse ceremony, the guard said. No exit until sunrise clearance. Lyra reached into the saddlebag and produced a sealed document. She extended it toward the guard without urgency. He looked at the seal. His face changed. The seal was Kalen's personal mark, the silver wolf biting its own tail, the kind of seal that did not come with questions attached. Travel authorization, Lyra said. Health Commission, border territories, medical survey. The guard handed it back. He looked at his counterpart. His counterpart looked at the seal impression on the document, and then at Lyra's face, and then back at the gate. Clear, the guard said. The gate opened. She had forged the seal 8 months ago, in the same month she had begun memorizing the physician's passage and cataloging which archive copies were small enough to fit in a saddlebag. Planning, in a life constructed by someone else's certainties, was the only form of freedom available. The road outside the capital was empty under the blood eclipse sky. The color of everything shifted into red and shadow. The familiar landmarks altered enough to feel like a place you'd only heard described rather than traveled. Lyra rode at a controlled pace, not fleeing, moving. There was a difference, and the difference was audible to any wolf within tracking range who might be listening for the particular frequency of panic. She was not panicking, she was furious, which was different, and in her body fury was a cold and specific thing, not heat but pressure. The feeling of something compressed into a smaller space than it was meant to inhabit. She held her daughter against her chest with one arm, the child's weight small and definitive and warm, and she rode into the dark with the specific knowledge that she had just left behind every comfortable thing she had ever built, and that she would not be getting any of it back. That knowledge had a shape to it. She let herself feel the shape. Then she put it away because the road was dark and uneven, and the horses needed guidance. The infant made a sound, small, uninformed, the kind of sound a person makes when they are not yet a person and are simply responding to temperature or pressure or the rhythm of a horse's movement. Lyra looked down. I know, she said quietly. I know. I'm figuring it out. The child settled. Mira rode beside her in silence for a long time. Then, she'll need a name. Yes. You've been thinking about one. Lyra was quiet. The red sky moved above them. The capital's outer lights were still visible behind them, but diminishing. The way all lights diminish when you move away from them, slowly at first, then faster as the distance compounds. Celine, Lyra said. Mira considered it. Moonroot. The old word for it, before the Empire standardized the language, before they decided what everything meant. He'll know who she is if the name ever reaches him. He'll know who she is regardless. Names are the least of it. Lyra looked at the road ahead, the dark cutting through the borderlands toward the contested territories and whatever came after. I want her to know what she is before anyone else gets to define it. Even if I'm the one who defines it. Even if I'm wrong about some of it. She paused. Especially then. Mira said nothing. She understood that this was not a conversation requiring a response. They rode through the blood eclipse night, through the Empire's soft borders, and then through the places where the Empire's certainty became suggestion, became rumor, became the kind of silence that lands hold when no single authority has claimed them. The road became a track. The track became suggestion. The suggestion became the specific texture of untamed ground that Lyra had never ridden on before, and that her horse was navigating on instinct and displeasure. Sometime in the small hours, when the eclipse began to fade and the sky became the ordinary dark of deep night, Selene opened her eyes for the first time. They were gray, not wolf-pale the way Kalen's were, not the icy assessment of a predator, a deeper gray, the gray of deep water, the gray of everything you can't see to the bottom of. She looked at Lyra, with the unfocused, gathering attention of an infant discovering that the world contained faces. Lyra looked back at her. "Okay," Lyra said. "Okay? We're going to be all right." She didn't know if that was true. She knew she was going to spend the rest of whatever time she had making herself believe it, which was not the same thing, but was sometimes sufficient. 12 years later. The Shadowpack's eastern training ground was a flat expanse of packed earth surrounded by pine forest on 3 sides and a steep ravine on the 4th. And at 6 in the morning, when the mist was still coming off the trees and the cold was the particular sharpness of early autumn, it was used exclusively by Magnus's senior combat instructors and whoever they had decided to punish with the dawn shift. This morning, that was Selene. She was 12 years old and already tall for her age, her dark hair pulled back from her face with a strip of leather, her training clothes rough-woven and worn at the elbows, in a way that said this was not the first time she had been on this ground at this hour. She was facing Instructor Breck, who was 6'1" and 220 pounds of wolf-born combat training, and he was not taking it easy on her. He never took it easy on her. She'd stopped waiting for him to. "Again," Breck said. She went again. The sequence was disarm and counter, 12 moves, designed for a wolf aura user to create enough pressure in the opening that the opponent's footing destabilized before contact. Selene had no wolf aura. She had learned the sequence a different way, from the inside out, reading the patterns in Breck's body rather than reading the pressure in the air, learning to feel the intention in his posture a half-second before it became motion. She was getting better at it. She caught his wrist on the 7th move earlier than she was supposed to, redirected the throw, and had him off balance for approximately 1 second before he recovered and planted and shoved her backward with enough force to send her sliding 3 feet in the dirt. She got up, blood from a scraped palm. She wiped it on her thigh without looking. "That was early," Breck said. "It worked." "It's not supposed to work early. The sequence has a reason. The reason is to establish pressure through aura." She kept her voice flat, not disrespectful, just precise. "I don't have aura. I have to read the body instead. The body telegraphs earlier than the aura does, so I go early." Breck looked at her for a moment. He had been her primary combat instructor for 4 years, and in that time he had compiled a specific set of feelings about Selene that he did not discuss with anyone, including Magnus, which was itself a form of discipline. The feelings were approximately, she was wrong in ways that kept turning out to be right. She learned things in the wrong order and through the wrong mechanisms, and then performed them better than people who had learned them correctly, and she made him feel, in his more unguarded moments, like he was teaching someone something they already knew from a different direction. "Fine," he said. Again. Selene reset her stance. She didn't notice the 3 wolves watching from the tree line until the 3rd repetition. She noticed them on the 4th. She filed the information, completed the sequence, took the throw she couldn't avoid, got up. They were boys. 14, 15, 16, the older 2 wearing the red shoulder marks of junior warrior track. The 3rd was Dorian, 17, Magnus's youngest adjutant candidate, which was the pack's way of saying he was being groomed for authority and had therefore developed the particular confidence of someone who had been told he was important by people whose job was to tell him. "She's really small for someone who can't even shift," Doran said. Not quietly. Breck heard it. He kept his face neutral. This was its own form of instruction. Celine heard it. She finished the sequence she was running, came out of the final position, and stood with her back to the tree line. "You want to come down here and see how small I am?" she said. Not an invitation. The shape of an invitation with different contents. Doran laughed. It was the kind of laugh that was designed to sound easy. He came down. The mist was still rising off the ground. The pine trees stood in their rows without opinion. Doran was 17, 5 feet 11, with the easy physical confidence of a young wolf who had shifted for the first time 2 years ago and had spent those 2 years discovering that his aura was stronger than most of his peers, which had done predictable things to his personality. He crossed the training ground with a loose-jointed walk and stopped a few feet from Celine and looked down at her the way people look at things they have already categorized. "No offense," he said. "You came down here," Celine said, "just to watch. Breck's been doing the same sequence with you for an hour. Figured I'd see what the improvement looks like. Figured you'd decide in advance and come down to confirm it." Doran blinked. Then he smiled. The kind of smile that means the person has decided this is going to be easy. Wolfless girl with no aura, no shift, no pack standing. What exactly do you think gives you the right to... She moved. She had learned the sequence. She had also, over 4 years of pre-dawn sessions, learned what the sequence was built on top of, which was the reading of bodies, the understanding of intent and posture, the specific way aggression telegraphs itself in the shoulders and jaw of someone who is used to winning before the contact begins. Doran's body had been broadcasting for 30 seconds. She had been reading it since he started coming down the slope. She was inside his guard before his aura had time to respond. Her palm connected with his sternum at an angle that moved momentum rather than opposing it. And Doran, who had spent 2 years being told his physical force was exceptional, went down in the dirt with the specific expression of someone whose understanding of physics has just been updated. He lay there. The 2 boys in the tree line were very still. Breck was very still. The mist continued to rise off the ground. This did not seem to be affected by what had just happened. Doran got up slowly, which was the correct response. His face was doing several things at once. He looked at her. "How?" he said. Not aggressive anymore, genuinely. "Your right shoulder drops before you commit to a push," Celine said. "You've done it every time I've watched you train. You probably can't feel it because the aura compensates." She paused. "I can't use the aura compensation, so I read the shoulder." He stared at her. "You've been watching me train," he said. "I watch everyone." She said this the way you say things that are simply true. "You learn more that way." Doran looked at Breck. Breck looked at the middle distance in the way of a man who had decided he was not involved in this particular exchange. Doran looked back at Celine. "You're wrong about one thing," he said. "Okay." The pack standing part. Something in his expression had shifted into something more honest and less arranged. "You have standing. You just don't have it the way people expect you to." He turned and walked back toward the tree line, and his 2 companions fell in without comment, and in a few moments the pines had them again. Celine stood in the training ground with the dirt from the throw still on her back and the blood from her palm still drying on her thigh, and watched the tree line for a moment. Then she turned back to Breck. "Again," she said. Breck looked at her. His face had the expression it wore when he was deciding whether to say something. He decided to say something. "Alpha Magnus wants to see you after training." Celine's expression did not change. "What for?" "He didn't tell me what for. He doesn't usually explain requests." "He usually doesn't request." She picked up the training rod she'd dropped during the sequence. "He assigns." "Yes," Breck said. "He does." He met her eyes. One of the things Lara had taught her, in the years they'd spent in the Shadow Territories moving between small settlements and temporary positions, and the careful construction of lives that didn't call attention to themselves, was that when someone tells you a piece of information without the explanation attached, the absence of the explanation is itself information. You read what people don't say the same way you read Doran's shoulder. Breck was not saying, "This is routine." "Again," Celine said. They ran the sequence 4 more times. She got it right on the last repetition in a way that made Breck say nothing, which was how she knew it was the best she'd done. Magnus's hall was built from ironwood and riverstone, functional rather than ceremonial. The kind of structure that said the man inside it was interested in things lasting rather than things impressing. Celine had been in it 6 times in 4 years. She had the specific memory of each occasion because she was the kind of person who remembered rooms she might need to navigate in the dark. Magnus was standing at the table when she entered. He was 51 years old, graybeard, built the way mountains are built, with the specific patience of something that has been in place long enough to stop caring about being interrupted. He wore no formal markings. He had been offered them 5 times by the imperial court and had declined in ways that were by now legendary enough that his pack told stories about the declining. He looked at her when she came in and said, "Sit." She sat. He remained standing. He looked at her for a moment with the particular attention he sometimes directed at things he was deciding about. "There was an incident near the Oran border settlement 3 days ago," he said. "Iron Fang scouts, testing our eastern boundary." "I heard." "You shouldn't have heard. 2 of the patrol wolves talked about it near the eastern well at dawn yesterday. Sound carries in the morning." She paused. "I wasn't trying to overhear." "No, you never are." He sat down across from her, which was something he rarely did. He put his hands flat on the table. His hands were the kind of hands that had built things and broken things in equal measure, and they rested on the table with the ease of someone who no longer needed to use them to make a point. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole of it before you respond." Celine said nothing. She had learned over 4 years of being in rooms where Magnus decided things that he didn't say that sentence casually. "The Iron Fang incursions are increasing," he said. 3 in the past month. They're probing, not raiding. They want to know our response time, our patrol patterns, our numbers. That's preliminary assessment for a campaign. He looked at her. "We are not a large pack. We're strong, but not campaign strong. You're telling me there's going to be a war. I'm telling you I need people in positions where their particular capacities match the particular problems." He paused. "I'm telling you that I have a position I've been holding for the right candidate for 8 months, and I've been watching you for 4 years, and I've decided." Celine looked at him. "You want me in combat," she said. "I want you on the Eastern Perimeter Response Unit. 3 wolves, rotating, responsible for early detection and initial neutralization of border incursions." He held her gaze. "You'll be the only non-wolf on any combat unit in this pack's history." The silence in the room had a specific quality. "Your mother will need to agree," he said. "She won't." "I know, I'm telling you anyway because it's the honest way to have this conversation." He turned one of his hands over on the table, a gesture that was less command and more acknowledgement. "You have abilities that I cannot explain and that your trainers cannot explain and that you cannot explain. And in a pack that is about to fight a war, I would rather have an unexplainable asset on the right side of my border than standing in the yard at dawn practicing falls." Celine was quiet. She thought about Doran's shoulder. She thought about the 4 years of pre-dawn sequences and Breck's neutral face and the specific feeling, which she carried without ever knowing exactly what to do with it, of being a shape that didn't fit the container it had been given. "When?" she said. 3 weeks. After the Western delegation clears out." He stood, which was his way of signaling completion. "Talk to your mother." Celine stood. She looked at him. "She's going to ask you why," she said. "She's going to ask why you'd put me in a combat role when there are wolves with aura who could fill it. Tell her I said—" Magnus stopped. He seemed to decide something. "Tell her I've been watching both of you for 4 years, and that I don't keep things I don't trust." Celine nodded. She left the hall and walked back through the pack settlement, past the cook fires that were starting up for the morning, and the children crossing toward the learning hall, and the wolves going about the work of existing in a place they had committed to defending. She moved through it the way she always moved through it, at the edges, observing, aware of every pair of eyes that tracked her without looking directly at her, and every conversation that paused at a slightly different rate than conversations usually paused. She was not shadow pack by blood. Everyone in the settlement knew it. No one said it directly, which was the politeness of people who understood that direct statements required direct responses, and no one wanted the version of Celine that would respond. Her mother's dwelling was at the settlement's northern edge, small, stone-built, with a herb garden in the side yard that Lyra tended with the specific focus she gave to things she could control. The dwelling always smelled like dried lavender and something medicinal underneath it, the permanent residue of a healer's life carried from one location to the next. Lyra was at the work table when Celine came in. She looked up. She saw Celine's face. "Sit down," Lyra said. "Magnus offered me a combat assignment." Lyra set down what she was holding. She sat down, which was its own form of response. "He wants me on the Eastern Perimeter unit," Celine said. "Border response. 3 wolves, rotating. They're expecting Iron Fang incursions." Lyra was quiet for a moment. Outside, the morning was beginning to make its ordinary sounds. Birds, axes, the distant bell of the learning hall. "You want to go?" Lyra said. "Yes." "You've wanted to go for 2 years." "Yes." Lyra looked at her daughter. 12 years of her daughter's face, learning to read it in the way you learn to read any landscape you have decided to inhabit completely. She saw the specific straightness of her spine that meant Celine had already decided. She saw the specific quality in her gray eyes that was not defiance but something older than defiance, the look of something orienting toward where it was meant to be. She looked at her hands, the hands that had carried this child out of an obsidian hall under a blood-eclipsed sky while a king issued his verdict on her existence. "There's something you don't know," Lyra said. Celine went very still, the kind of stillness that happens when a person's body understands that the next sentence is going to change the shape of everything they thought they knew. "There's something I should have told you before now." Lyra met her daughter's eyes and held them. "And I didn't tell you because I thought I could keep you safe by not telling you, which is the lie that every person who loves someone tells themselves when the truth is that they were scared and they kept it for themselves, and I don't get to do that anymore." The morning sounds continued outside. The bell of the learning hall rang its second signal. "Tell me," Celine said. And in the dwelling at the edge of the shadow-packed settlement, under an ordinary autumn morning that had no blood eclipse in it, and no obsidian throne hall and no floating stone of judgment, Lyra opened her mouth to say the thing she had been carrying for 12 years, the thing that would reach backward and reshape everything her daughter understood about the life she had been living. Before she could speak, the pack's alarm horn sounded. 3 long blasts, 1 short. Eastern border incursion, Iron Fang forces. Not scouts, something much larger. Celine was on her feet before the 3rd blast ended, and the look on her face in that moment was not the look of a 12-year-old girl in a borrowed life who had never been told where she came from. It was the look of whatever she actually was, unnamed, uncontained, older than the hierarchy that had tried to erase her before she could breathe twice, and it was aimed at the door with the specific direction of something that had finally found the right question to answer. Behind her, Lyra's hands gripped the edge of the work table, and the sentence she had been about to speak collapsed back into silence, waiting, as it had always waited, for the moment that was finally and irrevocably coming. The horn was still echoing when Celine hit the door. She didn't run. Running was what you did when you hadn't decided yet. She moved at the specific pace of someone who had made the decision before the sound finished, which was faster than running and quieter. The gait of a body that had stopped negotiating with the situation and started solving it. Behind her, Lyra said her name once. Just once. The tone of it was not a command and not a plea, but the specific frequency between those two things that only existed between a mother and the child she had carried out of the worst night of her life. Celine paused at the door. She did not turn around. "I'm coming back," she said. "I know you are. That's not what I'm coming back, and you're going to tell me." She said it the way you say things you need to be true badly enough to state them as if they already are. "Whatever it is, I'm coming back and you're going to tell me." She left before Lyra could answer. The settlement was already moving. Wolves pulling weapons from doorway mounts, the pack's defense hierarchy assembling in the instinctive order that years of drill created, faster than thought, cleaner than panic. Celine moved through it upstream, cutting toward the eastern perimeter where the patrol station sat on a rise above the tree line. Brett caught her at the armory. "You're not cleared for this," he said. Flat. Not unkind. Just accurate. Magnus offered me the Eastern unit 3 hours ago. He offered. You haven't been assigned. There are Iron Fang forces on the eastern border right now. She looked at him. You want to have the procedural argument, or you want to know what's out there? Breck looked at her for 1 second. 1 second was how long it took him to make decisions, she had learned. He handed her a short blade from the armory rack. Standard patrol issue. She took it and kept moving. The eastern perimeter rise was a 20-minute walk through pine forest. She covered it in 11. The two wolves already posted there were Kale and Voss, senior patrol, late 20s, the kind of wolves who had been doing this long enough that the alarm didn't change their faces. They looked at Celine when she came up the rise, and Kale said, Breck send you? Magnus, she said, which was simpler. Kale looked at Voss. Voss shrugged with the economy of a man who had decided this morning was already complicated enough without adding another argument to it. Below them, through the trees, the eastern approach was a long meadow that ended at the forest line of the contested territory. In the gray morning light, Celine could see movement at the far tree line. Not scout movement, the specific density of organized movement, bodies in formation, not concealing themselves because they had passed the point where concealment served them. How many? She said. 40 minimum, Kale said. Could be 60. What are they carrying? Standard raid armaments, but that's not... He paused. There's something else, something in the formation. Celine looked. She saw it before he finished the sentence. At the center of the Iron Fang formation, moving with the specific protected positioning of something valuable, was a figure in dark gray. And around that figure the other wolves moved differently, not the movement of soldiers around a commander, but the movement of bodies responding to an aura field. A high alpha, at minimum. They didn't come to probe, she said. No, Kale said. They did not. Voss was already running the signal system, the sequence of flag and whistle that would tell Magnus's command unit what they were looking at. Celine watched the formation cross the meadow. 40 wolves, maybe more, behind a high alpha who was broadcasting enough aura that even she, who couldn't read aura the way pack wolves did, could feel it as a change in the quality of the air, a pressure in the jaw and the back of the neck, the way you feel a coming storm before you see it. Every wolf on the rise felt it too. She saw it in the way Kale's breathing changed and the way Voss's hand moved to his weapon with an involuntary grab that he immediately controlled. She felt no impulse to grab anything. What she felt instead was the thing she had no name for, the thing that happened sometimes in the training ground when the sequence was running at full speed and the situation became clear enough that everything except the immediate problem stopped mattering. It was not calm exactly. It was the opposite of scattered. It was everything narrowed to a single point of focus sharp enough to cut. She filed this feeling away the way she filed everything she didn't understand about herself. In the back. For later. They'll hit the south tree line first, she said. The ground is softer on the north approach, easier for a large formation to get bogged down. They'll angle south to keep the formation tight. Kale looked at her. How do you know that? I've been walking this perimeter for 4 years. She kept her eyes on the formation. The south access path along the ravine edge is the only approach that handles 60 wolves without breaking formation cohesion. They'll use it. And if they don't, then I'm wrong and we adjust. Kale and Voss exchanged a look over her head that she didn't bother to track. She was already moving down the far side of the rise toward the ravine edge. Wait, Kale said. We don't go down there. Our position is observation and signal. Your position is observation and signal. She looked back at him. My position is apparently undetermined since I'm not formally assigned yet. Magnus will have Magnus told me 3 hours ago that he has a position for someone whose capacities match specific problems. She looked at the formation below. 40+ wolves behind a high alpha, the south path along the ravine. I'm going to find out if he was right. She went down the rise before Kale could generate a complete sentence about it. The ravine edge was steep and overgrown, the kind of terrain that was difficult to move through quickly without training in exactly this landscape. She had trained in it for 4 years. She moved through it the way water moves through familiar ground, finding the channels, using the grade, letting the slope help rather than fighting it. She positioned herself at the point where the south path narrowed between the ravine edge and a dense stand of ironwood. If she was right about the formation's angle, they'd compress here, tighten the column, and for approximately 40 seconds, they'd have reduced lateral space for aura projection. She waited. Her breathing was even. Her hands were still. She was aware of the short blade in her hand and equally aware that a short blade against 40 wolves was not a military strategy. What she was building was not a defense. It was information. If she could get close enough to the formation to see the High Alpha's markings before the full engagement, she could tell Magnus who they were fighting, which was worth more right now than anything she could do with a blade. The formation came around the tree line exactly where she'd said it would. She was 15 feet from the path edge, in shadow, downwind, still. The first wave of wolves came through the narrow point in clusters of 4, and she watched their markings. Iron Fang red, the mountain tooth insignia on the shoulder, 3 ranks of soldiers before the center cluster. The center cluster. The High Alpha was a woman. Late 30s, Celine estimated, though the aura field made her seem larger than her physical size, the way High Wolf presence expanded the space around a body. She wore Iron Fang command colors and carried no visible weapon, which meant either she was so certain of her dominance that she'd dispensed with armament display, or her weapon was something that didn't need to be visible. Probably both. Her face was the kind of face that had made a specific decision about itself a long time ago and stopped negotiating with the outcome. Sharp-boned, clear-eyed, with the particular stillness at the center of her expression that Celine associated with people who were used to being the most dangerous thing in any room they entered. Celine committed every detail to memory. The rank markings. The formation's numbers. She counted 53 wolves, more than the initial estimate. The positioning of the High Alpha relative to her guards, not protected at the center but slightly forward, which meant she intended to be seen. An arrival that was meant to carry a message before any word was spoken. She was about to pull back up the ravine when the High Alpha stopped. She stopped in the middle of the path, in the narrow point, with 53 wolves arranged around her, and she turned her head toward the ravine edge, directly toward Celine. The distance was 15 feet. The shadow was real. The wind was wrong for a wolf to catch scent. There was no logical mechanism by which this woman should have known she was there. She was looking directly at her. "Come out," the woman said. Her voice was medium-pitched, unhurried, the voice of someone who had given this particular kind of instruction many times before. "You've been there since the narrow point." Celine did not move. "You're not broadcasting aura," the woman continued, "which means you're either not wolf-born or you're better at suppression than anyone I've encountered in 20 years of command." A pause. "And you're not running, which means you're not afraid, which means you're either very stupid or very confident, and stupid people don't count wolf formations in the dark." 4 of the Iron Fang soldiers had detached from the formation and were moving toward the ravine edge. They were going to reach her position in about 8 seconds, regardless of what she decided. Celine stepped out of the shadow. She stood on the ravine edge with the morning light on her and her short blade down at her side, 12 years old and aware of exactly how this looked, which was the kind of awareness that was not useful, and therefore she set it aside. The High Alpha looked at her. Something moved through her expression. Not surprise exactly. The specific recalibration of someone who had formed an expectation and was quietly revising it. "How old are you?" she said. "Old enough to have counted your formation before you hit the path." The woman studied her. "Shadow Pack." "I live here," Celine said, which was not the same thing, and she left that distinction available for anyone who wanted to look at it. "Who trained you?" "That's not information that helps you." The woman almost smiled. It was the almost that was interesting, the expression that came to the edge of something and then pulled back, not from repression, but from discipline. "You don't smell like Shadow Pack," the woman said. "You're a long way inside Shadow Pack territory for someone making observations about who belongs here." The 4 soldiers had stopped a few feet away. They were watching the High Alpha for signal. She had not given one. "Iron Fang isn't at war with the Shadow Pack," the woman said. 53 wolves across an unannounced border doesn't have another name. "Passage. We're looking for passage through the eastern edge to the Oran territories. The northern route is contested." "You could have sent a courier." Couriers from Iron Fang tend not to return from shadow territory. You're aware of this. Magnus has reasons for that policy. I'm sure he does. The woman tilted her head. The aura field around her pulsed once, a single beat, like a heartbeat felt at distance. Celine felt it in her jaw, in the base of her skull. She did not react to it. I want to speak with Magnus directly, not through channels, today. You walked 53 wolves across his border to ask for a meeting. I walked 53 wolves across his border to demonstrate that I could, the woman said, and this time the near smile became real, brief, and specific. The meeting is the request. The walk was the introduction. Celine looked at her. 12 years old, short blade at her side, 53 wolves in the peripheral vision. What's your name? Celine said. The woman regarded her for a moment. Sarah, she said. Commander Sarah of the Iron Fang Coalition's Northern Division. She paused. And you are? The person who decides whether you get to stand here long enough to meet Magnus. Celine turned toward the rise without waiting for a response. Follow me. One wolf. You come alone or you don't come. Silence behind her. Then the sound of movement. One set of footsteps. Celine climbed the rise with Commander Sarah 3 paces behind her and didn't look back, because looking back was what you did when you weren't sure the person behind you had decided to comply. And she had already decided to behave as though Sarah had complied, which was different from certainty, but was the only posture that made compliance more likely than the alternative. Her hands were not shaking. She did not think about why they weren't shaking. She thought about the path, the next 10 minutes, Magnus's face when she walked into his hall with an Iron Fang commander in tow, uninvited, unescorted, through a security breach that she had personally converted into an approach channel. She thought about what Lyra had been about to say. She filed it. She kept moving. Magnus heard the report before she finished delivering it. He had that capacity, the ability to extract information from incomplete transmission, which was why his hall was the center of decisions in the Shadow Pack and not a ceremonial room. He was on his feet by the time she reached Sarah's name. You walked an Iron Fang commander through my eastern perimeter, he said. I walked one wolf through, Celine said. Her formation is still at the South Path access. Kale and Voss have eyes on them. I'm aware of what Kale and Voss have eyes on. He looked past her at Sarah, who had entered the hall with the specific demeanor of someone who understood they were on contested ground and had decided to treat that fact as neutral rather than threatening. Commander, Alpha Magnus, Sarah said, you brought 53 wolves to my border. I brought 53 wolves to the edge of your border. I crossed with one. She looked at Celine briefly. At the invitation of your people. She's not formally. Magnus stopped. He looked at Celine. Something moved through his expression that was not quite rueful and not quite proud, and was almost certainly both. He sat down and gestured at the chairs across from him. Sit. They sat. Magnus looked at Sarah. You want passage, he said. I want an alliance, Sarah said. The hall was quiet. Iron Fang and Shadow Pack have no common interest, Magnus said. We have one that appeared approximately 6 weeks ago. Sarah set her hands flat on the table, a gesture Celine recognized, the same gesture Magnus used when he was about to say something that didn't have diplomatic softening available. The Silver Moon Empire is moving, not toward Iron Fang, not toward Shadow Territory, toward both, simultaneously. Magnus did not react visibly. This was its own reaction. Kalen, he said. His advanced scouts have been in the Oran territories for 3 weeks. They're not doing the same thing we were doing on your border. They're not testing. They're measuring. Surveying land for permanent fortification. Sarah met his eyes. He's not planning a campaign. He's planning an annexation. The word dropped into the hall and stayed there. Celine sat very still. She felt the word in the same way she'd felt Sarah's aura pulse on the path, in the jaw, in the back of the skull. Not fear. That clarifying pressure again, everything narrowing to the point of what was actually happening. He has 3 ongoing campaigns, Magnus said. He concluded 2 last month, quicker than anyone projected. Sarah paused. He's better resourced than our intelligence estimated, and he has something new field compounds, new wound treatment protocols. His wolves are recovering from injuries in the field at a rate that shouldn't be possible. The hall was so quiet Celine could hear the cook fire outside. She could feel Lyra's work table under her own hands, the grain of the wood, the dried lavender smell of the stone dwelling at the settlement's northern edge, 20 years of archive notes in a saddlebag, and 12 years of quiet application in a pack that had needed exactly that knowledge. She understood what she was hearing. She kept her face still. "What exactly are you proposing?" Magnus said to Sarah. "A mutual defense agreement. Shadowpack and Iron Fang. Joint perimeter response, shared intelligence, agreed neutrality in overlapping territories." Sarah's voice was even. "Kalen will reach Iron Fang territory within 2 seasons if he's not checked. He'll reach yours within 3. Separately, neither of us can hold. Together, we present a problem he can't solve with a single campaign. You're asking me to trust Iron Fang. I'm asking you to recognize that trust isn't the variable. Kalen is the variable." Magnus looked at her for a long moment, the kind of moment that had decisions inside it. "I'll need 3 days," he said. "You have 2, Sarah said. "After 2 days, my northern division needs to move, or Kalen's scouts will have our position." "One condition for the 2 days," Magnus said. Sarah waited. "Tell me about the field compounds." His voice was measured. "The wound treatment protocols. Where they came from." Something moved through Sarah's expression. "Careful." "Our intelligence on that is incomplete." "Incomplete how?" "We know the origin is a healer, a specific healer with an Ivari lineage background." Sarah paused. "We believe Kalen has been using that lineage's work for the past 4 or 5 years, which would explain the timeline of his accelerated campaign success." She met Magnus's eyes. Whoever this healer was, they were important enough to Kalen that losing them was significant, which suggests the work he's been using is archival, stored copies. The silence in the hall had a specific weight. Celine did not look at Magnus. She looked at the table, at the grain of the wood. She kept her breathing even and her hands still, and she sat with the information that Kalen had spent 12 years using her mother's work to fund his wars, and she felt the shape of that knowledge settle into her chest like something that had always been there and had just been given its correct name. Magnus looked at Celine. She looked back at him. "Give us the room," he said. Not to Sarah, to Celine. Sarah raised an eyebrow. She looked at Celine once, and there was something in that look, not dismissal, something more careful, the specific attention of a person who is revising an assessment. She stood and walked to the outer hall. Magnus waited until the door closed. "Your mother's archive," he said. "Yes." "You knew." "I understood it while Sarah was talking." Celine looked at him. "You knew she was Ivari lineage. You've known since she came here." "I knew she was a healer with a specific kind of knowledge. I didn't ask questions I didn't need answered." His eyes were steady. "I'm asking now." Celine was quiet for a moment. She thought about Lyra at the work table, the grip on the wood, the sentence she hadn't finished. She thought about 12 years of pre-dawn training and the specific silence her mother kept about everything before the shadow territories. She thought about what Celine didn't know about herself and what was apparently about to stop being something she didn't know. "She was going to tell me something this morning," Celine said. "Before the horn." "Yes," Magnus said. "She was." The 2 words landed with the specific weight of something confirmed, not revealed. Confirmed. "You know what it is," Celine said. "I've known for 4 years." He held her gaze with the steadiness of someone who had been holding a thing for a long time and was setting it down carefully. "I told your mother last month that the window for telling you had closed, that what was coming would find you before she was ready." He paused. "I was wrong about the timing by approximately 8 hours." Celine looked at the table. "Tell me," she said. "It's not mine to tell." His voice was not unkind. It was the specific inflection of a man who understood the exact weight of what he was withholding. "What I can tell you is that the empire your mother ran from is now running toward us, and that the reason it's relevant, The reason Kalen's scouts are in the Oran territories and why Sarah walked 53 wolves to my border this morning may have less to do with land than with what he's been looking for since he lost the archive. Celine raised her eyes. He's not just looking for her work, she said. No, Magnus said. He's not. The hall held the silence. Outside, the settlement sounds continued. Cook fires, morning work. The pack that had held this territory against 4 separate Imperial probes through 3 alphas and 1 war, still standing because standing was what it had decided to do. Celine stood up. I'm going to go talk to my mother, she said. Yes, Magnus said. You are. She walked to the door. She stopped. The Eastern Unit, she said. You said 3 weeks. I said 3 weeks before Sarah arrived with 53 wolves. He looked at her. The timeline has changed. How changed? You're on the unit as of this morning. He said it the way he said most things that mattered, without ceremony. You were on it when you stepped out of that ravine. She looked at him for a moment. She nodded. She opened the door. Sarah was in the outer hall, standing with her hands behind her back, looking at the ironwood wall with the specific patience of a high alpha who has decided to perform composure for an audience she's not sure is watching. She turned when Celine came out. Their eyes met. Sarah said very quietly, How long have you been here? 12 years, Celine said. Something moved through the commander's face. The revision again, faster this time. You're not Shadow Pack, Sarah said. It was not an accusation. It was the specific tone of someone putting pieces in sequence. I live here, Celine said, and walked past her toward the door and out into the morning. The settlement spread around her, cookfires and children and wolves who had organized their lives around the principle that this ground was theirs and they would hold it. She had grown up in the edges of this, in the not-quite belonging that she had long since stopped trying to resolve, and she walked through it now with a different weight in her chest than she had carried an hour ago. Kalen was not looking for Lyra's archive. He was looking for what Lyra had taken when she left. Celine walked north toward the stone dwelling with the herb garden and the lavender smell, and she walked at the pace of someone who had been carrying a question for 12 years and had just understood that the question was not what she thought it was, and that the answer was not waiting in a sentence her mother hadn't finished. It was waiting in everything her mother had built around her, every pre-dawn session, every careful silence, every choice about what to teach her and what to protect her from and when. She pushed open the dwelling door. Lyra was standing in the middle of the room. She was not at the work table. She was standing in the center of the floor, the way people stand when they have been waiting for something and the waiting has finished. She looked at Celine's face, and she saw something there that told her the conversation had moved past the place where she got to control the pace of it. I need you to tell me everything, Celine said. Not part of it. Not the part you decided was safe. She held her mother's eyes across the small stone room with its lavender smell and its 12 years of careful life. Everything. Lyra looked at her daughter. She sat down. She said, You were born in the Silver Moon Throne Hall during a blood eclipse, and your father is King Kalen, and the night you were born he ordered you killed, and I have spent 12 years making sure you were alive long enough to be ready for the day that order came to find you. The dwelling was very quiet. And the day you were born, Lyra said, the Moonstone, the stone the Silver Moon Empire uses to judge every heir that has never failed in 300 years, the Moonstone looked at you and went silent. She met Celine's eyes. Not because you had nothing, because what you have is something the stone had no measure for. Outside, the pack's second alarm horn sounded. Not the eastern border this time, the western watch. Multiple signals, fast, overlapping, the pattern that meant not incursion, not scouts, the pattern that meant the kind of force that made scouts irrelevant. Silver Moon war colors had just appeared on the horizon. The western horn pattern meant one thing in the Shadow Pack signal system, and every wolf in the settlement knew it before the second sequence finished. Not raiders, not scouts, not a formation testing the boundary the way Sarah's division had tested the eastern approach, with the careful methodology of a force that wanted information before commitment. The Western pattern meant something that had already committed, something that had decided the outcome before it arrived, and was now simply executing the decision. Celine heard it and understood it, and looked at her mother and saw that Lyra had heard it too and understood it in a different way. The way you understand something you have been dreading for 12 years when it finally makes the sound you always knew it would make. "How long have they known where we are?" Celine said. Lyra's face was the specific stillness of someone whose body has absorbed a blow and is deciding what to do about it. "I don't know." "How long could they have known?" "I don't—" She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs, a gesture Celine had never seen her make before. The gesture of someone physically holding themselves into a shape. "I took precautions for years. I moved us 4 times in the first 3 years. I never used my name. I never used yours." "Someone used something." Lyra looked at her. The look had 12 years in it, and underneath the 12 years was the specific expression of a woman who had built her entire life around a single protective principle and was now sitting in the room where that principle had failed. "Get your kit," Celine said. "Celine. The compounds, the archive copies, whatever you can carry in one pack." She was already moving toward the door. "I'll come back for you. I need to talk to Magnus. You need to stay with me. I need to know what's coming through the Western approach before I can make any useful decision about where we go." She stopped at the door. She turned and looked at her mother with the specific precision of someone who has received a large amount of information in a very short time and has not yet had the space to feel any of it. "You said the Moonstone went silent because it had no measure for what I have." "Yes." "What does that mean?" Lyra held her gaze. "It means that whatever you are, Celine, it isn't something the Empire created. It's something that existed before the Empire had a category for it." She paused. "And right now, I need you to trust that I'll explain the rest of it when we are not about to be overrun by Silver Moon forces." Celine looked at her for one more second. Then she went through the door. The settlement had converted itself in the 4 minutes since the Horn. Defense posture, the Pack's specific version of it, was not the frantic mobilization of an unprepared force. It was the quiet, precise activation of a community that had practiced this enough times to do it without theater. Weapons retrieved, children moved to the interior shelters. The Pack's senior warriors falling into position along the Western approach's natural choke points, the places where the terrain helped and numbers mattered less. Magnus was already in the command position on the Western Rise when Celine reached him. Kale was beside him. Voss had stayed at the eastern perimeter to maintain the watch on Sarah's formation, which meant the situation had 2 open fronts, and the Pack's attention was having to split itself in a way that made every calculation harder. Sarah was standing 3 feet from Magnus. She had not been invited to the command position. She was there because she had followed, and Magnus had not wasted the time it would take to remove her. Below the Western Rise, at the edge of the approach meadow, the Silver Moon force was assembling. Celine looked at it and counted and did the arithmetic and did it again because the first answer seemed wrong. 200 wolves, minimum. Full war deployment. Not a retrieval force, not an Imperial envoy with armed escort. 200 wolves in Silver Moon campaign formation, the specific arrangement that Kaelin's military had refined across 17 years of territorial expansion. The staggered rank structure that allowed them to project aura pressure from the front while maintaining combat capacity in the rear columns. At the center of the front rank, a figure in silver war cloak with iron clasps at both shoulders. She did not need to have seen him before to know who it was. The specific way the formation arranged itself around him said everything. Not protective positioning, the way Sarah's guards had arranged themselves around her on the path. Orbital, the way objects arrange themselves around the thing with the most mass. "He came himself," Magnus said. "He said it the way you say things that change the math of a situation completely." "He came himself," Sarah confirmed. Her voice was flat and careful. "Which means this isn't punitive action. This is a statement." "What kind of statement requires 200 wolves?" Kale said. "The kind you want people to remember you didn't have to make twice," Sarah said. Magnus looked at Celine. She was looking at the figure in the silver war cloak at the head of 200 wolves. She was aware of what she was feeling, which was not the clarifying pressure she'd felt on the path with Sarah. This was something older and less organized, something that had been living in the back of her chest for 12 years without a name, and had just been introduced to its correct context. She looked at Kaelin the way you look at the answer to a question you've been carrying so long you'd stopped expecting the answer to arrive. "They'll send a parley signal," Magnus said. "They always do. Form, before they dispense with it." The parley signal came 90 seconds later. A single silver-cloaked rider moving to the midpoint of the meadow, white flag extended. Magnus went down alone. He was that kind of alpha, the kind that didn't use distance to manage risk. Celine went down beside him. He did not tell her to stay. She understood this as the operational assignment she'd been given that morning, formalized in the moment when she had stepped out of the ravine with 53 wolves behind her. She was on the unit. The unit went to the parley. The parley rider was young, 20 at most, with the carefully neutral expression of someone who had been given an exact script and was determined not to deviate from it. "Alpha Magnus of the Shadow Pack," the rider said. "King Kaelin of the Silver Moon Empire requests immediate compliance with the following terms. Surrender of the rogue healer known to operate under Ivari lineage designation within your territory. Surrender of any individual or individuals traveling under her protection. Full access to any archival materials in her possession." The rider paused. "Compliance to be indicated by the presentation of said individuals at the western meadow boundary within 1 hour. Non-compliance will be interpreted as an act of war against the Silver Moon Empire and will be treated accordingly." Magnus stood in the meadow with the morning light on him and 200 wolves arranged on the rise behind the parley rider, and his face was the specific face of a man doing internal mathematics that he did not intend to share with anyone in his immediate vicinity. "Tell your king," Magnus said, "that the Shadow Pack does not surrender guests." The rider nodded as though this response had been anticipated, which it probably had, and turned his horse and went back up the rise. Magnus turned and walked back toward the settlement line. 1 hour, Celine said, walking beside him. "Less now that the parley is complete." He kept his pace even. He didn't expect compliance. The parley is form. He wanted to announce the terms so that when he moves, the surrounding packs know he gave the option. Is he going to move? 200 wolves don't travel to a location to not move. He looked at her sideways. "Your mother needs to be in the interior shelter." "I know." "You need to go tell her that." "I know." She looked back once at the rise where the Silver Moon formation was settled in its patient-rehearsed arrangement. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to talk to Commander Sarah," Magnus said, "and find out whether an alliance that was theoretical 40 minutes ago has become operational necessity." He said it with the specific dryness of a man who had lived long enough to recognize when situations resolved their own ambiguities. Lyra was not in the dwelling when Celine got back. The work table was clear. The archive copies were gone from the shelf where they'd been stored behind the false panels Celine had known about since she was 9, because knowing about the panels in the rooms you lived in was the kind of thing her mother had taught her without teaching it, by example, by the specific attention she paid to hidden spaces. The herb garden was empty. Celine stood in the middle of the stone dwelling with the lavender smell and the absence of her mother, and felt the specific quality of a situation that has changed shape while you were looking somewhere else. She ran, not the controlled pace from before. Running this time, which meant the decision had already been made somewhere in her body before her mind caught up with it. She went north through the settlement, past the interior shelters where the pack's children had been gathered, past the secondary supply stores and the healer station where Lyra had worked for 4 years under the name Eva, past the places that had constituted a life assembled from borrowed pieces. She found Lyra at the settlement's northern gate. Not heading for the interior, heading out. Mira was with her, the same Mira from 12 years ago, older now, still with that specific quality of a person who had made her decisions once and didn't revisit them. She had 2 horses, and the pack with the archive copies, and the look of someone executing a plan. Celine stopped. "What are you doing?" she said. Lyra turned. She had the pack on her back and the specific expression of a person who had known this conversation was coming and had not found a way to make it easier. "He came for me," Lyra said. "Not you. The parley terms. He came for both of us. You heard what Sarah said. He's not just looking for the archive. If I go north, toward the Orin territories, he'll follow. Lyra's voice was even, controlled. The voice she used when she was holding something very large at a distance through the deliberate application of discipline. It gives the Shadow Pack a vector to defend that doesn't require them to face 200 wolves in a direct confrontation. It gives you a death sentence in open territory with no pack behind you. Mira knows the northern route, so Mira is 60 years old, and there are 200 silver moon wolves 200 yards from this gate. Celine moved to put herself between her mother and the gate. Not dramatically. Just stood there, the way you stand when you're making a point with your body that words aren't going to carry. You don't get to sacrifice yourself without consulting me. You're doing exactly that. She held her mother's eyes, the gray eyes that Lyra had looked at across 12 years of carefully constructed mornings. You just told me who I am, what I am. You told me, and then you decided to solve the problem yourself before I could do anything with the information. Lyra was quiet. That's not protection, Celine said. That's the same thing he did, deciding for someone else what they can survive. The words landed. She saw them land. Lyra's face changed in the specific way faces change when something true hits them at the exact angle of an old wound. You are 12 years old, Lyra said. I know how old I am. You cannot. I put an Iron Fang commander in front of Magnus this morning by stepping out of a ravine with a short blade and no aura. Her voice was flat, not angry. The specific register of someone presenting evidence. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you that you don't get to leave without talking to me first. Silence. Behind them, somewhere in the settlement, a voice was relaying orders in the clipped cadence of combat preparation. The sounds of the pack organizing itself for a fight it was outnumbered for. Mira looked at Lyra. The look was eloquent in the way of two people who had been through enough together that they communicated mostly in silences. Lyra let out a breath, a specific breath, the kind that releases something held too long. All right, she said. All right, what? All right, I'm listening. Celine looked at her for a moment. Then she turned and looked at the western rise from the northern gate, running the terrain in her mind. 200 wolves in Silver Moon formation. Magnus negotiating Sarah into an operational alliance. 1 hour, probably less, before Kaelin dispensed with the form of waiting. Sarah's formation on the eastern border, she said, thinking aloud. 53 wolves. If Magnus gets the alliance confirmed in the next 20 minutes, that's 53 experienced Iron Fang fighters who can come through the eastern approach and take the Silver Moon formation from the flank while they're oriented west. Kaelin's been in enough campaigns to anticipate a flanking. His formation is arrayed for a forward engagement. The eastern flank has ravine terrain that compresses movement. 53 wolves in the ravine approach, hitting a formation that has to turn to respond, while Magnus's pack holds the western line. It's not an annihilation. It's a stalemate. She paused. A stalemate is enough. It's enough to make the cost of this specific retrieval higher than Kaelin wants to pay publicly. Lyra stared at her. Celine became aware of how that had sounded, which was not like a 12-year-old girl describing what she'd seen in training drills. She filed this too. The back. Later. You said the Moonstone had no measure for what I have, Celine said. What does that mean in practical terms? Lyra was quiet for a beat. It means that your presence affects aura-sensitive wolves in ways that don't correspond to any known power category. Her voice had shifted, become the careful, precise register of a healer giving a diagnosis. I've observed it. In training, when you're under real pressure, the wolves around you respond instinctively. Not to your commands, to your presence. Something in their aura reading capacity recognizes something in you and responds to it before their conscious minds register what they're responding to. Dominant submission. Something older than that, more fundamental. She met her daughter's eyes. I don't fully understand it, Celine. I've spent 12 years observing it and I still can't give it a name. But it's real. It's real. Celine turned that knowledge over. She had noticed, she had always noticed, in the way you notice a pattern you don't have language for, that wolves around her sometimes paused at the wrong moments, sometimes broke eye contact at the same instinct that should have held it, sometimes deferred in the specific involuntary way of bodies responding to a hierarchy, signal they hadn't consciously received. She had filed it. She had been filing it for 4 years under the category of things she didn't understand about herself and would need to address eventually. Eventually had apparently arrived. She was about to say something when the third thing happened. It happened quietly, which was how betrayals usually happened. Heir came through the northern gate at a controlled walk. He was alone, which was unusual for this level of alert. He was holding his hands away from his weapon mounts, which Celine noticed before she noticed anything else. The specific body language of someone who is managing how they will be perceived in the next few seconds. "Magnus needs you at the western line," he said to Celine. She looked at him. Something in the quality of the air had changed, the way it changed when a body was broadcasting something it was trying not to broadcast. She had learned to read bodies. She had been reading bodies for 4 years. "Where is Magnus?" she said. "Western command position." "You just came from the north." Heir's face did not change. This was the problem. It should have changed slightly, the micro-adjustment of a person caught in an inaccuracy. It didn't, which meant he had prepared for the question, which meant the question had been anticipated, which meant the situation was something other than what it presented as. She moved, not toward the gate. Sideways, putting herself between Heir and Lyra in the specific motion she'd learned in the training ground. Not confrontation, repositioning, changing the geometry of the space before the next action happened. "Celine," Heir said. "Who told you to come here?" she said. Magnus is on the Western Rise running an alliance negotiation with an Iron Fang commander. Her voice was flat. He doesn't pull people from defensive positions to deliver messages during an active threat alert. He uses signal. She held his eyes. "Who told you to come here?" Heir looked at her for a long moment. She read his face the way she read Doran's shoulder, the way she read everybody she had ever paid attention to. And what she saw was not aggression and not malice, but the specific expression of a person who has made a decision they understood the cost of and has now arrived at the moment of paying it. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it the way you say things that are true and insufficient. Then he stepped to the side, and through the northern gate, Silver Moon soldiers came. Not through the western approach. Not through the meadow where Magnus's pack was positioned and Sarah's wolves were riding hard from the east. Through the northern gate, which required someone with shadow pack access and knowledge of the patrol patterns to have left open at the right time. 4 soldiers. Then 6, moving with the silent precision of a force that had been holding its position for some time, waiting for the signal that the targets were located. Celine had no wolf aura. She had 4 years of pre-dawn sequences and the specific education of someone who had been learning to compensate for what she didn't have by understanding everything she did have with exceptional precision. She moved before the soldiers finished coming through the gate. The first man went down from a redirected momentum carry, his own forward motion used against him, Celine's palm connecting with the angle of his jaw that rotated his balance point past his ability to correct it. The second was faster and larger, and got a grip on her arm before she could clear the angle, and she let him have the grip and used it as an anchor to put her knee into his midsection at the exact point where the armor's plate coverage ended. He dropped. The third and fourth came together, and she was out of room, and she knew it, and she did what she had learned to do when she was out of room, which was stop trying to win and start trying to buy time. And the difference between those 2 goals in a physical situation was the difference between fighting the thing in front of you and moving toward the thing that solved the problem. She grabbed Lyra's arm. "Run," she said. Lyra ran. Mira was already on one of the horses, moving, the old woman's body finding the reflexes of a person who had once ridden out of an obsidian throne hall in the dark and had apparently retained the muscle memory. Celine was 3 steps behind Lyra when something hit her from the side. Not a soldier. Heir. He caught her around the shoulders in a restraining hold, not violent, not the impact of an attack, but the controlled embrace of a man who needed her to stop moving, and she heard him say very close, "I had no choice. Do you understand? They had my daughter. They have had her for 3 weeks. You have to stop. If you run, they'll—" She felt the sentence the way she felt things she had no language for. In the jaw, in the chest, in the place where the unnamed thing lived. She felt the weight of it. A man who had been someone she trusted and who had made a choice that she could not call evil because she knew the shape of the thing that had forced it. She stopped fighting him, not because she'd given up, because she understood that the information was more important than the motion. "Where is she?" Celine said. "They moved her last week. I don't know." Where was she? Oran Outpost, Eastern Oran, the secondary garrison. They took her to guarantee. His voice broke in the middle of a sentence. The specific break of someone whose self-control has been maintaining something for 3 weeks and has just reached the structural limit. She's 7 years old. Celine stood in the grip of a man she didn't hate for what he had done and looked at the 4 Silver Moon soldiers who had gotten back to their feet and were now arrayed between her and the direction her mother had run. And she ran the arithmetic of the situation with the cold, clear speed of a body that had learned, across 12 years of living in the margins of everything, that emotion and calculation were not opposites. They were the same thing when they were working correctly. She could fight the 4 soldiers. She would lose. She could run after Lyra. The soldiers would follow. She could wait, here, in this position, and be taken to whoever Kalen had sent to receive her. Or, she looked at Kale. His face was the face of a man who had broken something he could not fix. "Get me to Magnus," she said. "Right now, before these 4 report back." "I can't. They have your daughter in an Oran outpost with skeleton garrison because the main force is here." She held his eyes with the specific intensity of someone delivering precision information. "If Magnus can redirect Sarah's eastern unit to the secondary Oran garrison instead of the western flank, we can get her out before Kalen knows the eastern approach has changed. But I need to be talking to Magnus in the next 4 minutes." Kale stared at her. The soldiers were reassembling behind him. 2 of them had drawn weapons. "I'm 12, Celine said, "and I just told you how to get your daughter back. So you need to decide right now whether you trust that or you trust the people who took her." Kale looked at the soldiers. He looked at Celine. He made the decision the way it looked like it cost him, which was the correct way to make a decision that cost something. He turned toward the soldiers. "New orders from command," he said, in the flat, certain voice of a senior pack wolf who had been giving orders for 15 years. "Perimeter sweep, western approach, move." The soldiers moved, not because they trusted him, because the voice of command in a wolf hierarchy activated before skepticism could, and because the specific certainty of his delivery left no gap for doubt to enter, and because 3 of the 4 were junior-ranked and junior-ranked wolves, in Celine's observation, spent most of their operational lives waiting to be told what to do next. The 4th was not junior-ranked. He was looking at Kale with the specific expression of someone whose calculation had arrived at a different answer. He reached for his signal horn. Celine was already moving. She hit the soldier's arm from the outside, deflecting the horn grip before it reached his mouth, and in the same motion she was past him, through the gate, running north through the pine forest with Kale's footsteps behind her and the morning air cold in her lungs and the full shape of the situation finally, completely visible to her. Kalen had not come with 200 wolves through the western approach because he was confident. He had come with 200 wolves through the western approach because he was afraid of what was in the Shadowpack settlement. He had come with a secondary unit through the north because he wanted to take it before the western confrontation began, quietly, before whatever she was had time to understand what it was capable of. And the Moonstone, 12 years ago, in an obsidian hall under a blood-eclipsed sky, had not gone silent because she was empty. It had gone silent because it knew what she was, and it didn't have the courage to say it out loud. She ran. Behind her, the soldier's signal horn finally sounded, late, incomplete, the sound of someone who had gotten to the moment just after the window closed. Ahead, the pines opened toward the western rise where Magnus was standing at the edge of the worst odds he'd faced in 20 years of holding this territory. And somewhere to the north, Lyra was riding into open ground with the archive on her back and no protection, and the sentence she had almost finished in the stone dwelling with the lavender smell was still hanging in the air between them, unfinished, waiting. Celine ran toward the one thing she could still control. Everything else would have to wait for her to survive the next hour. She came out of the pine tree line at a dead run, and Magnus saw her before she saw him clearly, which told her his attention was already distributed across every approach simultaneously, the specific awareness of a commander who had stopped trusting any single direction to stay quiet. She hit the western rise slope without slowing and covered the last 40 feet on the incline the way she covered difficult terrain, by committing to it completely rather than negotiating with the grade, and she was beside Magnus before his nearest guard had finished turning to track her movement. "Kale opened the north gate," she said. Her breathing was elevated but controlled. 4 Silver Moon soldiers came through. "They're compromised now. I don't know how long before they regroup and signal the main formation." Magnus looked at her. "1 second. Where's your mother?" "Riding north with Mira. She has the archive." "That's open ground." "I know. I need Sarah's eastern unit redirected." She was already pulling breath back to even, the way Breck had taught her, because a compromised respiratory system made clear thinking harder, and she needed clear thinking more than she needed to show how hard she'd run. Kale's daughter is in an Orin secondary garrison, Eastern Orin, skeleton crew because the main force is here. If Sarah hits that garrison instead of the western flank, she gets the girl out and eliminates Kalen's hold on Kale. We get Kale back as a functional asset instead of a compromised one. Magnus was quiet for half a second. "You worked that out while running through the pines," he said. "I worked it out while Kale was holding me and telling me about his daughter." She met his eyes. "Is Sarah still in your hall?" "She's mounted on the eastern approach with her unit waiting for my signal." He looked at her for the specific length of time that decisions take. Then he turned to the signal runner on his left. "Eastern redirect, secondary Orin garrison, extraction priority. Tell Commander Sarah the target is a 7-year-old girl and the garrison is undermanned. She'll understand what that means." The runner moved. Magnus turned back to the western meadow. The Silver Moon formation below had not moved. 200 wolves in campaign arrangement, Kalen at the head of the front rank, and the specific quality of stillness that a large, disciplined force projects when it is waiting for the moment it has been given permission for. Patient, the way a blade is patient, not resting, ready. "He knows the north approach was compromised," Magnus said. It was not a question. "His secondary unit went quiet. He'll have noticed." "How long before he moves?" "He's already decided to move. He's choosing his moment." Magnus's jaw was set in the way it set when he was computing things he didn't like the answer to. "He has 200 wolves, and I have 60 functional fighters with Sarah's unit now redirected east. Those are bad numbers. His formation is west-facing. I know what direction his formation is facing. I mean that I can approach from the eastern tree line without going through his aura field front on." She was looking at the formation, tracking the gaps, the way she tracked gaps in any arrangement of bodies she needed to navigate. "His forward aura projection is directional. The lateral edges have coverage, but it's thinner. I can get to within 30 feet of the front rank from the eastern angle before his wolves register a pressure response." Magnus turned and looked at her with the expression she had seen him wear exactly twice before, both times when someone had said something in his hall that changed the shape of what he was willing to do. "You're 12 years old," he said. "You said that this morning too." She looked at the formation, at the silver-cloaked figure at its head. "And this morning you put me on the eastern unit because you said my capacities matched specific problems. So tell me I'm wrong about the aura projection angle." Magnus was quiet. He was not quiet because he thought she was wrong. "What happens when you get to 30 feet?" he said. "I don't know exactly." She said it straight because it was the truth and because Magnus had never responded well to people dressing truth in confidence it hadn't earned. "My mother told me this morning that wolves respond to my presence in ways she can't fully categorize. I've noticed it in training. I've never tested it at real scale." She paused. "But Kalen came with 200 wolves to the front and a secondary unit through a gate he'd compromised in advance, which means he is not certain about what happens when his wolves get close to me. And a king who is uncertain spends more resources than a king who isn't." The morning light was strengthening. The mist had burned off the meadow. 200 wolves below them in clean autumn light, and beyond them the capital of an empire that had decided 12 years ago that the easiest solution to an uncertainty was to remove it from the world. Magnus looked at the formation. He looked at Celine. He had been an alpha for 23 years. He had made the decision that cost the most in the worst conditions. 6 times that she knew of. and each time he had come out the other side with the specific knowledge that the decisions that looked like losses in the moment were sometimes the only architecture from which something survivable could be built. She had watched him make decisions for 4 years, and she knew the shape of this one from the outside. He was deciding whether to spend her. She understood that this was the correct frame. She was a resource with unknown capacity in a situation where the known resources were insufficient. Using unknown capacity was better mathematics than certain loss. She held no resentment about being part of the mathematics. She had walked into the mathematics voluntarily. What she felt was the pressure of the moment, clarifying and cold and precise, the feeling of everything she was oriented toward a single point. Eastern tree line, Magnus said. You get to the angle and you hold position until I give the signal. You do not move into that formation's range before the signal. Understood. Understood. And Celine, he looked at her. His face had something in it that was not command. The specific look she had seen him direct at the pack's youngest wolves when he was about to send them somewhere that mattered. If something goes wrong on that approach, you run north. You find your mother. The archive and whatever you carry between you are worth more to the future than this ground. She held his gaze. Signal me when you're ready, she said. She went down the eastern slope of the rise and into the pine forest fringe that ran along the meadow's edge, moving low and quiet through the last cover before open ground. The Silver Moon formation was 40 yards across the meadow, and from this angle she could see what she hadn't been able to see from the rise. The lateral edge of the formation was thinner than the front, 5 wolves deep instead of 8, and the aura coverage dropped at the edge because the front-rank wolves were projecting forward, and the rear-rank wolves were maintaining cohesion inward, and the lateral coverage was the functional gap between those two priorities. She was right about the angle. She had been right about it from the rise, and she was more right about it up close, which was one of those situations where certainty and proximity moved in the same direction. She held her position in the tree line and watched the formation breathe. That was the word for it. A formation that size had its own respiratory pattern, the slight shifts of 200 bodies maintaining readiness, the collective micro-movements that were not action but the perpetual preparation for action. She had watched Breck's body for 4 years learning to read what bodies said before they said it. A 200-wolf formation said things at a different scale but through the same grammar. It was holding. But the tension in the lateral edge had changed in the last 2 minutes. 3 wolves on the eastern-facing side had shifted their orientation. Not much, 15 degrees, the kind of adjustment you make when your peripheral awareness has registered something without your conscious mind having processed it yet. They were starting to feel her presence. She did not know what she was. Her mother had spent 12 years observing and had not arrived at a name for it. The Moonstone had recognized it and gone silent rather than try. What she knew from the training ground and the ravine path and 12 years of living in the edges of a world that kept responding to her in ways it couldn't explain was that whatever she was, it had a reach that preceded physical contact. The question was whether that reach worked at scale, on a formed military unit, under the specific pressure of a combat situation. She was about to find out. Magnus's signal came from the rise. 2 short whistle patterns. She moved out of the tree line. She walked. Not ran. Not crept. Walked at the measured pace of someone who has decided that the quality of their movement is the first message they're sending. And the message is that this ground is not yours, that I cross it on my terms, that the space between us is not a threat I'm fleeing but a distance I'm choosing to close. The eastern lateral wolves saw her at 25 yards. She watched the response move through the formation the way a current moves through water, invisible until it reaches the surface. The 3 wolves who had already shifted orientation went fully alert, heads turning, and then the ones beside them, and the response propagated inward toward the formation's center faster than any verbal command could have traveled. She kept walking, 20 yards. The lateral edge was doing something she had no prior reference for at this scale. The outermost wolves had stopped projecting formation cohesion, not because they'd been ordered to, because their aura reading capacity had encountered something it was trying to process, and the processing was taking priority over the standing orders. She could see it in their posture, the slight backward weight shift, the specific stillness that was not readiness but recalibration. 15 yards. One of the lateral wolves made a sound, not a word. The involuntary sound of a body that has received a signal it doesn't have a category for. The formation rippled, 12 yards. Hold! The voice came from the center of the formation, low, carrying, the voice that had run an empire for 17 years on the principle that it did not need to raise itself to be obeyed. The formation held, with effort. She could see the effort in the bodies of the lateral wolves, the specific physical tension of a command being applied against an instinctive response that was running in the opposite direction. Kalen walked through the formation. The wolves stepped aside for him the way they always stepped aside, orbital, without being told. He came through the ranks and stopped at the lateral edge, inside his formation, 10 yards from her. She stopped. They looked at each other for the first time across a distance that could be crossed in seconds. He was exactly what the distant image from the rise had suggested. Larger than she'd processed from a distance, the physical scale of a man who had been running on wolf aura saturation for 17 years and whose body had metabolized that into something that took up more space than ordinary mass accounted for. The silver war cloak, the iron clasps, the pale gray eyes that were the same color as her own and that she noticed with the specific clinical attention of someone encountering a data point they'd been told to expect. He looked at her for a long time. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. "You brought 200 wolves," she said. "So you expected something." Something moved through his face. The calculation, she recognized it from Lara's description of the night she was born. The specific internal arithmetic of a man for whom every encounter was an assessment. "You stopped my formation's lateral cohesion from 12 yards, he said, "without a wolf aura." "I didn't do anything," she said. "Your wolves did it." "What they responded to came from you." "Then maybe your wolves are smarter than your strategy." His jaw tightened, not in anger, in the specific tension of a man who has not been spoken to in this register in a very long time and is running the unfamiliar experience through a system calibrated for deference. "Where is your mother?" he said. "Not here." "She'll be found." "She's been found before," Selene said. "By you. And she left anyway, and she's been gone 12 years, and she has the archive you've been using to keep your wars running, and she's outside your formation range, so your leverage on that question is not what you came here believing it was." Kalen looked at her. She looked back at him. She was 12 years old, and she was standing 10 yards from the man who had ordered her death before she could draw her second breath. And she felt no fear, which she noted as a data point without assigning it meaning, and she felt no grief, which she also noted. And what she felt underneath both of those absences was the thing she had been carrying unnamed for 12 years. The pressure and the clarity, everything narrowed to this point, this man, this 10 yards of autumn meadow between them. "You ordered me killed," she said. The formation behind him was very still. "I ordered a risk removed," Kalen said. "An unverifiable heir in a bloodline that cannot sustain ambiguity. I was 4 hours old. You were a question I couldn't answer and couldn't afford." His voice was level, not defensive. The specific register of a man explaining a decision he made the way he made all decisions, by the arithmetic of the Empire's survival, and who has not, in 17 years, had reason to revisit the arithmetic. The Empire runs on certainty, on bloodline clarity. A wolfless heir in the Silver Moon succession is not a child. It's a fracture point. "So you tried to eliminate the fracture point?" "Yes." The honesty of it landed in the air between them with the specific weight of something that had not been softened for delivery. "And now," she said, "you've brought 200 wolves to retrieve the fracture point. I've come to assess what the fracture point has become. Because your wolves stop working when I get close to them." His eyes moved across her with the specific attention of a man who had built an empire on knowing how to read power in whatever form it presented itself. She let him look. She had nothing to hide. She had never had anything to hide. She had been exactly what she was from the first breath. And the only question that had ever actually mattered was whether that was a deficit or something else entirely. "The Moonstone," he said. She waited. "The Moonstone did not fail at your judgment," he said. "I told the court it failed. I told them it indicated nothing, which I framed as emptiness." He paused. A precise pause. the kind that contained something being weighed. It did not indicate nothing. It pulsed twice, and then it went dark. Not inactive, not broken. Dark. The way something goes dark when it is confronted with a scale it has no capacity to display. The meadow was quiet. Behind her, somewhere in the pine line, she could hear Magnus's pack holding its position. 60 wolves against 200, waiting on the math to change. "You knew," she said. "I suspected. I convinced myself the suspicion was fear, and that fear in an emperor is the same as weakness." Something moved through his face that was neither the calculation nor the cold, something older and less organized. "I was correct that it was fear. I was incorrect that fear is always the wrong response. You tried to kill me because you were afraid of me. I tried to kill you because I was afraid of what you would do to everything I built." He held her gaze. "Those are different things. Not to the person being killed." Silence. Behind him, in the formation, something was happening. She could see it without taking her eyes off Kaelin. The lateral wolves had not recovered their cohesion. The pressure of her presence at this distance, sustained over 3 minutes, was doing something to the formation's internal structure that was not combat response and was not simple fear, but was the specific systemic effect of a hierarchy signal that contradicted the one they were standing inside. Every wolf in that formation was running 2 signals simultaneously. Kaelin's dominance field, which was real and substantial and had been the ceiling of their world for years, and whatever she was projecting, which was not dominance exactly, but something that the part of them that processed dominance could not distinguish from something more fundamental. She did not know how long it would hold. She did not know what would happen when it stopped. She looked at Kaelin and understood that he knew she was doing it even though she wasn't doing it deliberately, and that his response to that knowledge was the most honest thing about this confrontation. He had not ordered an attack. He was standing 10 yards from her and talking, which was what you did when the resource in front of you was more valuable than the objective you came with. "What do you want?" she said. Lyra's sentence, 12 years ago, in the Obsidian Hall. The same words. She heard the echo of them, and she did not know if he did. "I want to know what you are," he said. "So do I," she said. And then the horn sounded. Not Magnus's signal, not the pack's pattern. The flat, carrying blast of a silver moon war horn, and it was coming from the north, and it was close. The secondary unit. The 4 soldiers from the northern gate, or whoever had replaced them when Kael's redirect didn't hold. They had found a line through the northern approach, and they were in the settlement. She heard, underneath the horn, a sound she had been not hearing for the past 10 minutes because hearing it would have broken the calculation. Mira's horse. Not galloping. The specific labored sound of a horse that had been pushed to its limit and stopped. North. Close. Her mother had not made it to open ground. Kaelin saw it on her face. She knew he saw it because she felt her face do the thing faces do when the thing you were holding at arm's length through discipline and necessity stops being holdable. The specific shift of a person whose calculation has just been changed by something that lives below the level of calculation. "She's in the settlement," Celine said. It was not to Kaelin. It was to the fact of it. She looked at him. He looked at her. Behind him, 200 wolves. In front of her, 60 wolves in a red line situation, and a mother who had carried her out of an obsidian throne hall 12 years ago and had apparently not been given the distance she needed. She had told Lyra this morning in the stone dwelling with the lavender smell, "You don't get to sacrifice yourself without consulting me." She had meant it. She looked at Kaelin one more time, at the pale gray eyes that were the same color as hers, at the face of the man who had made the arithmetic of her existence a question to be resolved rather than a life to be lived. "Call off your northern unit," she said. His expression did not change. "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for me not walking into your formation right now." She held his gaze with the specific quality of someone who has stopped negotiating and started describing. "Your lateral wolves haven't recovered cohesion in 3 minutes. I haven't tried to push it. I've just been standing here." She took 1 step toward him. "You want to know what I am. You want to understand what the Moonstone couldn't measure. You won't get that from a retrieval unit that takes us back to the capital in chains." Another step. 8 yards now. You'll get it by calling off the North unit right now and finding out what happens when I stop holding back. The formation behind him shifted, not in response to his command, in response to her second step. Kaelin stood between his formation and whatever she was, and she watched him do the arithmetic, the same arithmetic he had always done. Empire survival, resource assessment, the calculus of power, and she watched him arrive at the answer that she had already known he would arrive at, because she had grown up reading bodies, and Kaelin's body was the most honest thing about him. He raised his fist, the signal for halt. Behind him, the formation held. He looked at her. 10 yards. 8. The distance of a choice that had been waiting 12 years to be made correctly. "Commander dressed," he said, loud enough to carry North. "Stand down." A pause. Then the distant confirmation call. The northern horn went silent. The meadow held its breath. Celine stood 8 yards from her father in the autumn morning light, and whatever she was opened in her chest like a door she had never known was closed, and the wolves at the lateral edge of his formation dropped to one knee, not in response to his authority, in response to hers. Kaelin looked at his kneeling wolves. Then he looked at her. His face, for the first time, held something she had no prior reference for in him, something that was not calculation and not cold, and was not the specific expression she had seen in Lyra's description of the night she was born. It was something that had been waiting under all of those things for 12 years, held down by the weight of an empire and the arithmetic of power and the particular stubbornness of a man who had made a decision and then built 17 years of consequence on top of it. She did not name it. She did not have to. She turned toward the settlement. "Wait," Kaelin said. She stopped. "If you walk in there," he said, "and my secondary unit sees you coming, they will make decisions before I can countermand them. They were given retrieval orders." She looked back at him. "Then come with me," she said. The words landed in the meadow between 200 Silvermoon wolves and 60 Shadowpack fighters, and the full weight of everything that had been building since the night a blood eclipse tore the sky open above an obsidian throne hall. Kaelin looked at her for a long moment. He stepped forward, out of his formation, past the lateral edge, into the space between. The wolves behind him went absolutely still with the specific stillness of a formation that has just watched its center move in a direction it was not prepared for. He walked toward her. She held her ground until he was 4 feet from her, close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes in the morning light, the pale gray that was the same as hers. "If this is a misdirection," he said quietly, "and your alpha uses this opening to hit the formation while I'm out of position, I will not call it off. Do you understand?" "Magnus doesn't need the opening," she said. "He just needs you to stop requiring him to use it." Kaelin looked at her. She turned toward the settlement and walked, and after 3 paces, she heard his footsteps behind her. She did not look back. The pine forest received them both, and behind them in the meadow, 200 wolves and 60 wolves looked at each other across open ground for the first time without the immediate architecture of violence holding them in position, and the morning held that impossible stillness, and everything that was about to happen next was balanced on the edge of a choice that had not yet been completed. From somewhere in the settlement, a woman's voice. Lyra. Not screaming, something more specific. The voice of a person who has been contained and is now aware of it, and is deciding, with the specific cold precision of someone who has been in worse situations and survived them, what to do about it. Celine's pace did not change. Whatever was waiting in the settlement, whatever the secondary unit had found and how they had found it and what they had decided to do with it before Kaelin's stand-down reached them, she was walking toward it with the man who had built the system that created this situation walking 3 paces behind her. She did not know what she was going to do when she got there. She knew exactly what she was going to do when she got there. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and she had learned, across 12 years of living in the space between what she was supposed to be and what she actually was, that the distance between those two truths was where everything that mattered happened. She walked into the settlement. The settlement's interior was wrong in the specific way that spaces go wrong when violence has moved through them recently without completing itself. Celine read it before she saw anything definitive. Overturned water barrel near the cook fire. A child's leather shoe in the path, single, no child attached to it. The sound of the pack's adults not moving, which was different from the sound of them being still. The specific held quality of people who were frozen mid-action rather than resting. The secondary unit had 8 wolves. She counted them as she came through the northern approach, spread across the settlement's central yard, in the loose arrangement of a force that had achieved its objective and was now maintaining it rather than pursuing it. They had Lyra, not roughly, not with the theatrical cruelty of soldiers demonstrating dominance for an audience, with the quiet efficiency of a retrieval unit that had located its target and was holding position pending orders. 2 wolves flanking, close but not touching, and Lyra standing between them with the specific quality of stillness she wore when she was making decisions faster than her face was letting on. Mira was on the ground nearby, not unconscious, sitting with one hand pressed to her shoulder and the expression of someone who had been handled in a way she intended to have an accounting for. The 8 wolves saw Kaelin enter the yard behind Celine, and the formation shifted, the involuntary realignment of soldiers whose commander has appeared in an unexpected location and who are recalibrating what that means for the next instruction. The unit commander, a senior wolf with a campaign scar through his left eyebrow, looked at Kaelin, then at Celine, then back at Kaelin with the specific expression of a man who has been given a straightforward assignment and has arrived at a scene that is not straightforward by any available measure. "Stand down," Kaelin said. The unit stepped back from Lyra. Lyra looked at Celine. The look lasted approximately 1 second and contained the full weight of 12 years and the specific gratitude of a person who has been in a contained situation and has watched the person they would have burned everything to protect be the one to resolve it. Then the look moved past Celine to Kaelin, and the weight in it changed quality entirely. It was not hate. Celine had expected hate, or had expected something that would read as hate from the outside. What was in her mother's face was something older and less organized than hate. The expression of a person who has lived in the consequence of another person's decision for 12 years and is now standing 3 yards from the decision-maker and finding that the feeling is not what they had constructed it to be in their private accounting. It was grief, the specific grief of something that had been capable of becoming something else and hadn't. "Lyra," Kaelin said. Her mother said nothing. "Mira," Celine said, crossing to the older woman. She crouched beside her, checked the shoulder with quick hands. Not dislocated. Bruised impact, soft tissue, painful but not structural. Mira looked at her with the specific expression she had worn across every crisis Celine had observed her navigate, which was the expression of someone who had assessed the situation and found it within the range of things she had previously survived. "I'm fine," Mira said. "I know," Celine said. She held the older woman's eyes for a moment. Some things didn't require more than that. She stood and turned. Kaelin and Lyra were looking at each other across the settlement yard, with 8 Silvermoon soldiers standing at the edge of the space and the pack's wolves watching from the perimeter of the yard where they'd been frozen when the secondary unit arrived. Magnus was not yet through the northern approach. She had perhaps 3 minutes before the geometry of the situation added more variables than she could manage simultaneously. "We need to do this now," Celine said, to both of them, "before Magnus arrives and this becomes a military conversation instead of the one it actually needs to be." Kaelin looked at her. "You think there's a conversation," he said. "I think you walked out of your formation and into this settlement with one person, and that person is 12 years old, and you did it anyway." She held his gaze. "That's not a military decision. So, yes, there's a conversation." He was quiet. Around them, the settlement held its specific silence, everyone present understanding that what was happening in this yard was not a thing to interrupt. Lyra spoke. "You used my work," she said. Her voice was even, the way it was even when she was containing something very large by the deliberate application of will. "For 12 years. The field compounds, the wound protocols, the archive I copied and carried and spent 12 years refining here. You had copies, and you used them to run wars." Kaelin met her eyes. "Yes." "And the wars expanded your territory." "Yes." "And the expanded territory is what gave you the resources to bring 200 wolves here today." "Yes." He said each answer the same way, without softening, without the diplomatic shaping that powerful people learn to apply to their accounting. Celine noted this. She did not know if it was honesty or strategy, or the particular thing that happened when a man who had run his life on arithmetic arrived at the edge of a situation where arithmetic was no longer the available tool. "My daughter," Lyra said. The two words came out different from the others, stripped of the controlled register. "You ordered her killed." "I did. And then you spent 12 years building a military advantage from the work of the woman you drove into exile for trying to save her." Kaelin held her gaze. Something moved through his face that he did not attempt to manage. "Yes." The yard was very quiet. "And now," Lyra said, "you're standing in a shadow-packed settlement because your wolves dropped to their knees in front of a 12-year-old girl in an open meadow." She looked at him with the specific look of a person who has arrived at the far end of a very long calculation and is reading the final number. "What exactly did you come here expecting to do?" Kaelin looked at Celine. Celine looked back at him. "I came expecting to retrieve a resource," he said. "I arrived at a different understanding." "What understanding?" He was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of a man who is about to say something he has not said before and who has not practiced the shape of it. "That I built an empire on a hierarchy that I told myself was a natural law," he said. "That I made the decisions I made because the empire required them. And that I used the empire's requirements as the final authority on every question, including the ones that were not the empire's to answer." He looked at Celine. "Including the question of a child's right to exist." The words fell into the yard and stayed there. Celine stood in the morning light and let the words land and felt them with the specific quality of attention she gave to things she needed to understand fully before she responded to them. She had spent 4 years watching Magnus make decisions, and she had learned the difference between a man saying what he believed and a man saying what he had calculated was necessary to say, and she was not certain yet which one this was. She was not certain it mattered, because the question she had woken up with this morning was not whether Kaelin could be trusted. The question was what she was going to do in a world where he existed, and she existed, and the empire that had tried to erase her was still standing and would keep standing until something changed the principle it was standing on. Revenge would not change the principle. She had understood this somewhere in the pine forest between the rise and the meadow, in the specific way you understand things that arrive through the body before they reach the mind. A 12-year-old girl killing a king produced another king, and another hierarchy, and another version of the same accounting system that decided which lives were resources and which were fracture points. What she was, whatever it was, had stopped his wolves at the lateral edge of a 200-wolf formation without raising her hand. It had dropped his soldiers to their knees in the meadow. It had been doing something to every wolf she had trained beside for 4 years, subtle, unnamed, the thing Lyra had observed and catalogued without ever arriving at a category for it. She did not know yet what to build with it. She knew what she would not build. "You're going to go back to the capital," she said to Kaelin. He looked at her, not surprised, waiting. "You're going to go back to the capital," she said, "and you're going to call back the campaign forces from the Oran territories. Both divisions, full withdrawal." She held his gaze with the specific directness of someone who has stopped asking and started stating. "The Oran territory is not Silver Moonland. It never was. You measured it, and you moved toward it because measuring and moving is what the Empire does, and it's the first thing that's going to stop." "You're 12 years old," he said. "You've said that 3 times today, and each time the situation was different from what you expected it to be." She watched his face. "The Oran withdrawal is not a request. It's the condition under which I don't walk back into your formation and find out what happens when I stop managing my reach." Silence. Magnus came through the northern approach. He took in the yard in one look, the specific comprehensive assessment of a man who had been processing simultaneous threat vectors for the past 2 hours and had not stopped doing it when the immediate crisis paused. He looked at Lyra and at Mira and at the Silver Moon unit standing at the perimeter and at Kaelin and then at Celine, and whatever he read in her face told him to stop and hold his position, which he did, with the specific disciplined patience that had made him the kind of alpha who lasted. Sarah came in behind him. She stopped beside Magnus and looked at the scene in the yard with the expression she had worn on the path when Celine had stepped out of the ravine, that specific revision, the rapid reassessment of a person who is updating and understanding in real time. The Eastern garrison, Celine said to Sarah, without taking her eyes off Kaelin. Neutralized, Sarah said. The girl is with my unit. She's not hurt. Kael, who had come in behind Magnus, made a sound that was not a word. Celine did not look at him. She heard the sound and she filed it in the category of things that were true and that she would return to. She looked at Kaelin. He was running the arithmetic. She could see it. The way she could see everything in bodies now. The specific internal movement of a man who had built a life on calculation, arriving at the point where the calculation produced an answer he had not constructed a response for. What she had was real. It was not going away. His wolves had responded to it in the field, and they would respond to it again, and the next time he assembled a force and pointed it at something, she would be somewhere in the world being what she was. And the question of what that meant for an empire built on the principle that power had a ceiling and a hierarchy and a clear architecture of who stood where was not a military question. It was a question about what the empire was for. He had built it on conquest, on the principle that strength organized into hierarchy was the only durable answer to a world that would otherwise be chaos. He believed this. She could see that he believed it not as strategy, but as the deepest truth he carried. The thing he had used to justify every decision, including the ones that had cost him in a currency he was only now beginning to count. She did not think he was entirely wrong about strength and organization. She thought he was wrong about what strength was. The withdrawal, he said, not a question. And the formal acknowledgement, Celine said, in writing, in the Empire's record, that the child declared Wolfless at birth was not Wolfless, that the Moonstone's silence was misrepresented. She paused. Not for me. For the record. Because the Empire runs on certainty, and the most honest certainty it can carry right now is that it was wrong about what it was measuring. Kaelin looked at her for a long time. The yard around them held its breath. He nodded. It was a small movement, the smallest form a decision that large could take. She watched it and noted it and did not perform a reaction to it, because the decision was not a gift, and it was not a concession. It was the first accurate calculation he had made about her, which was that the cost of not making it was higher than the cost of making it. That was enough for now. He turned to his unit commander. We're returning to the capital. Signal the main formation. The commander looked at him with the expression of a man who has a great deal of questions and has identified this as not the moment for them. Yes, Majesty. The Oran campaign forces receive stand-down orders within the hour. He said it the way he said things that were decided, which was the way he said most things. But something underneath the delivery was different, some quality of the certainty itself, the specific sound of a man who has been certain in one direction for 17 years and has turned. The unit moved toward the northern gate. Kaelin stopped. He looked at Lyra. The look was different from the one he'd given the yard when he'd arrived. It had less arithmetic in it. It had something in it that had been under the arithmetic for a long time and had not previously been given space to be visible. The archive, he said. Whatever you'll give us to continue the field protocols. I'll give you what I give any pack that asks correctly, Lyra said. Through my channels, on my terms, with my name on the work. He held her gaze. That's acceptable. I know it is, she said. He left. She watched him go, and the thing in her face that had been grief shifted slightly, not into something easier, but into something more complete. The specific expression of a person who has been carrying a wound and has just looked at it clearly for the first time and understood that looking at it is not the same as healing it, but that healing requires the looking. And so this is where it starts. Celine stood in the yard and watched the Silver Moon unit file through the northern gate and listened to the sounds of the main formation beginning its withdrawal from the western meadow, the collective movement of 200 wolves turning in organized sequence, and she felt the morning settle around her differently than it had settled when she'd woken up in it. She did not feel triumphant. She had understood somewhere in the last 2 hours that triumph was not what this kind of moment produced. What it produced was the specific exhaustion of a person who has been running at full capacity against a situation that required everything and has arrived at the point where the situation no longer requires everything, and the body has no idea what to do with the spare capacity. She sat down, not ceremonially. She just sat on the ground of the settlement yard, in the dirt in the autumn morning light, because her legs had been deciding to do that for the past 20 minutes, and she had been overriding the decision, and there was no longer a reason to. Magnus crouched beside her. He was quiet for a moment. He had the quality of a man who knew how to be present in a space without filling it. "Kale," Celine said. "I know," Magnus said. He had no choice. He had a choice. He made it. The reason he made it was what you said. He met her eyes. That doesn't resolve the breach, but it changes what the breach was made of. Celine thought about Kale's face when he'd said, "I'm sorry." The specific quality of the apology, the way it held no expectation of being sufficient, no performance of remorse designed to produce forgiveness. It was the apology of someone who understood that what they had done had a weight that words could not balance, and had said the words anyway because silence would have been worse. She thought she knew something about that. "What happens to him?" she said. "That's a pact decision," Magnus said. "Which means it's my decision, with input." He paused. "He's been with me for 11 years. He put a 7-year-old girl in a situation he could not control in order to protect that same girl from a situation he could not prevent." He looked at the gate where Kyle had gone, following his daughter out of the yard. "I don't have a clean answer for that." "Neither do I," Celine said. "I think that's the honest answer." Magnus looked at her, the specific look she had seen him give things he was deciding were worth keeping. "What you did in that meadow," he said. "I walked toward a formation. You stopped the formation by walking toward it." "I don't fully understand how," she said. It was still true. It was less frightening as a truth now than it had been 3 hours ago, but it was still true. "Your mother will keep studying it," he said. "She'll try to name it," Celine said. "She's been trying to name it for 12 years. She looked at the northern gate. "I'm not sure it needs a name yet. I think it just needs to be used carefully." Magnus stood. He put his hand on her shoulder for a moment. It was the gesture of a man who understood the difference between a person who needed to be told they had done well and a person who needed to be acknowledged as the person they actually were. He had always understood that distinction with her. She thought that might be the thing about Magnus that she would carry longest. He went to speak with Sarah. Lyra came and sat beside her in the dirt. They sat together in the yard of the settlement, in the autumn morning that had started with a horn and a confession and the shape of everything changing. And neither of them spoke for a while, because the silence was the right size for what they were both holding. "You were going to tell me," Celine said finally. "I was going to tell you," Lyra confirmed. "You've been trying to tell me for a long time. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you in a way that didn't break something before you were ready for what came after the breaking." She looked at her hands. The healer's hands that had carried Celine out of an obsidian throne hall and across 12 years of careful constructed distance from everything they'd left behind. "I was wrong about the timing. Magnus told me last month. I didn't believe him." "Magnus is usually right about timing." "Yes," Lyra said. "He is. I know that. I still didn't believe him because believing him meant accepting that the window had closed and that you would find out in the middle of something I couldn't control." She paused. "Which is what happened." "I found out in the middle of something I could control," Celine said. "That's different." Lyra looked at her. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." They sat with that. The morning continued its ordinary work around them. The pack began to move again, the specific cautious return to function of people who have been suspended in a crisis and are now recalibrating back to the baseline of existing. Fires were restarted. The children came out of the interior shelters. Somewhere near the eastern approach, Kale was sitting on the ground with a 7-year-old girl in his arms, and the specific quality of a person who has been to the worst place available and come back from it, and does not yet know what to do with the fact of being back. Celine thought about him. She thought about the way survival forced choices that the people who hadn't faced that specific wall could not fully judge. And she thought about the way that truth did not make the consequences of the choices disappear, only made them more honest. And she thought that honest consequences were something you could actually work with, which was more than could be said for consequences that had been moralized into something simpler than they were. She thought about Kalen on the road back to the capital. She did not know what he would do. She knew what she had asked him to do, and she knew what he had agreed to, and she knew that a man who had built an empire on the principle that strength was the final authority was going to spend a very long time recalibrating what he had agreed to and why, and that recalibration was not going to be clean or fast or without backsliding. She was 12 years old. She had time to watch the recalibration happen and to respond to what it actually produced rather than what she projected it might produce. That was the only honest approach to a situation this complicated. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. Not the kind of forgiveness that required more trust than the available evidence supported, but something that left the door to a different accounting open. Something that did not use the wounds to build the next wall. The record, Lyra said. What you asked him to put in the Empire's record. About the Moonstone. Yes. You asked for that for the Pax, Lyra said, not for yourself. Celine looked at her. The Pax need to know what they were measuring was wrong before they can start measuring correctly. She paused. The Empire runs on certainty. The first honest certainty it can produce is that it was certain about the wrong thing. She looked at the northern gate, at the sky beyond it, the ordinary autumn sky with no eclipse in it. That's not a small thing. That's where everything starts. Lyra looked at her daughter for a long moment. The look of 12 years of mornings, of pre-dawn sessions watched from the dwelling doorway, of compound work and archive notes, and the specific observation of a mother who had understood from very early that what she was raising was something she could protect for a time, but could not ultimately define. She had tried to define it anyway, in the way you try to name things because nameless things are harder to carry. She had not succeeded. She had not needed to. I'm sorry, Lyra said. Celine looked at her. For the things I didn't tell you when I should have, Lyra said. For the years I spent deciding what you were ready for instead of trusting you to tell me. She held her daughter's eyes with the specific honesty of a person who has stopped managing the distance between what they feel and what they say. You were ready before I was. Celine held the words. She felt their weight, the genuine weight of them, not the performed weight of an apology constructed to produce a response, but the actual weight of a true thing said plainly. I know why you did it, she said. I know you do. That's not the same as it being right. No, Celine said. It's not. They sat with that too. The morning light was full now. The early gray burned off. The settlement carrying the particular warmth of autumn sun at mid-morning that had nothing to do with what the last 2 hours had contained and everything to do with the fact that mornings continued regardless. Celine looked at her hands, the scraped palm from the training ground, dried now, a thin dark line across the heel of her hand. The short blade she'd been given by Breck and had carried through every scene of the morning and had not used on anyone. She had not needed to use it on anyone. She did not think this was because she had found a peaceful solution. Exactly. She thought it was because the thing she carried was older than violence and operated at a level underneath it, and that learning to use it honestly rather than accidentally was going to be the work of years she did not yet have a map for. The work was the point. She had understood that much. Mira settled beside her on the other side, and the three of them sat in a line in the dirt of the Shadow Pack settlement yard, and nobody said anything for a while. And the quiet had the quality of something earned rather than imposed. Sarah crossed the yard toward them. She stopped at a respectful distance, the specific distance of someone who understood they were adjacent to a thing they were not part of. I'll be at your eastern perimeter by nightfall, she said to Celine, and the fact that she said it to Celine rather than to Magnus or to Lyra was its own kind of statement, delivered in the flat, certain voice of a woman who updated her understanding when the evidence required it. The Alliance terms stand. Thank you, Celine said. Sarah looked at her for a moment. How old are you? She said. 12. Sarah nodded slowly, the nod of a woman processing information that kept arriving in the wrong configuration for all her prior frameworks. Right, she said, and walked toward the eastern approach. Magnus, from across the yard, caught Celine's eye and held it for a moment. She read in his face the specific satisfaction of a man who had made a decision based on incomplete information and had watched the decision prove itself out. Not pride exactly. The quieter thing under pride. The acknowledgement that some things can only be known by doing them. She looked at the settlement around her, the pack putting itself back together. The children in the yard now, Two of them chasing each other through the cookfire smoke with the specific joy of people who do not yet carry the weight of the morning's accounting. An old wolf near the supply stores lifting a water barrel back to its position with the unhurried, methodical attention of someone for whom the work was the answer to the question. She thought about what she had said to Kaelin, that the Empire was going to stop measuring and moving first, that the Orin withdrawal was the beginning. She had meant it as a condition, and she had stated it with the authority of whatever she carried, and he had agreed. She did not think agreement was resolution. She thought agreement was the first step in a direction, and that the direction would require watching and correcting and returning to. She thought the Empire did not change in a morning because a 12-year-old girl walked across an open meadow. She thought the Empire changed over years, in the specific slow way that institutions change, through accumulated decisions made differently than they had been made before, through the gradual weight of a new principle displacing the old one. She had given the Empire a new principle this morning, that power was not the same as worth, that what the Moonstone couldn't measure was real, that the things a system cannot categorize are not therefore empty. It was a beginning. That was what beginnings looked like, she understood. Not the dramatic light of something finished, the ordinary autumn morning light of something started, something that would need tending, something that had roots in this yard and in this dirt and in the scraped palm of a girl who had walked toward 200 wolves and found that whatever she was, it was enough. She stood up. She looked at the horizon beyond the settlement's northern wall, the ordinary sky and the ordinary tree line, and the ordinary distance of a world that was the same as it had been yesterday and entirely different. Behind her, Lyra stood. And Mira. They stood together in the yard, the three of them, the way they had ridden out of the capital 12 years ago under a blood eclipse sky, together by choice and by necessity and by the specific bond that forms between people who have survived the same impossible night. The world of the Silver Moon Empire, as it had existed, was not the same world anymore. What came next was not written. Celine looked at the horizon. She was ready for the writing.